If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21, The Beedrill Leader. With just this green quality Pokémon egg, Cain could already consider the operation a complete success. As for the other 2 yellow quality Pokémon eggs, if he could take them, Cain would gladly do so, as the parents of these eggs were also quite talented. Although they were relatively weaker compared to the green quality egg, they were still valuable and rare. Even though both were yellow quality, there was a significant difference between those whose parents were yellow quality and those whose parents were green quality. But since he couldn't take the other 2, it was no longer necessary. The value of a yellow quality Pokémon didn't compare to that of a green quality one, the difference was almost exponential. With Murkrow's help, Cain packed the Pokémon egg and returned to the surface. Taking advantage of the fact that the Beedrill swarm hadn't returned yet, Cain left the dangerous area. Unlike the path he took to enter, Cain and Murkrow walked in the opposite direction from the center of the forest to avoid crossing paths with the returning Beedrill. Just as Cain was leaving the Beedrill nest with the Pokémon egg, the swarm's leader, who was far away, suddenly felt a pang in her heart, as if she had lost something very important. She immediately thought of the 3 Pokémon eggs she had left in the nest and was alarmed. Bzzz. Bzzz. As if she had gone mad, the Beedrill leader began screaming frantically, scaring the other Beedrill around her, who didn't dare to breathe. Without hesitation, she flew rapidly toward the nest, the first to leave. By that time, Cain had already fully exited Beedrill territory and had successfully avoided the frantic group of Beedrill flying back to the nest. He now found himself back in Metapod territory. The original plan was to avoid all the Beedrill and then destroy their nest. That way, the Beedrill, suddenly homeless, would surely search for the enemy frantically and be preoccupied with rebuilding their nest, allowing Cain and Murkrow to seize the opportunity without falling into another Beedrill ambush. In fact, if they played it right, they might encounter a reduced number of Beedrill each time and gradually wipe out the entire swarm. However, he hadn't expected to find a green quality Pokémon egg in the Beedrill nest. Changing the plan for this was perfectly acceptable. But what Cain didn't know was that stealing that Pokémon egg would have far more severe consequences than merely destroying the Beedrill nest. The Beedrill leader flew back to the nest at top speed, leaving behind the other Beedrill who couldn't keep up. When she saw that only 2 of the 3 Pokémon eggs remained, a wave of fury overtook her, and madness reflected in her eyes, which were already red by nature. Her murderous intent enveloped her entire body. The Beedrill that arrived after her, upon seeing that one of their leader's eggs had been stolen, also went insane. To the entire colony, the leader was everything, her high quality elevated the whole colony. But now, someone had stolen the leader's highest quality offspring, which meant the hope of the entire colony had been taken away. Bzzz. Bzzz. The entire forest was filled with enraged, out of control Beedrill. Suddenly, an image appeared in the Beedrill leader's mind, that small black Pokémon and the human who accompanied it. Perhaps due to the connection between parent and child, the Beedrill leader sensed that her child had been taken by that human and his Pokémon. Full of rage, the Beedrill leader let out a loud cry. Upon hearing it, all the Beedrill raised their heads and looked at her, like soldiers awaiting orders from their supreme king. The 2 pairs of wings on her back vibrated frantically, making her figure blur. The Beedrill leader flew out of the nest, following the scent of the Pokémon egg in the air. All the Beedrill followed her. With the entire Beedrill colony mobilized, the whole forest began to stir. All the Pokémon that saw the Beedrill pass by quickly moved aside. Any Pokémon with even a little awareness could feel the tension in the air, and upon seeing them, immediately backed away. Following Cain's escape route, the Beedrill approached the Metapod territory, finally stopping at its edge. In the entire forest, the Pokémon the Beedrill hated the most were Butterfree, and their biggest rivals were also Butterfree. However, since Butterfree were peaceful and didn't usually initiate conflicts, and the Beedrill didn't want to provoke an enemy with the same reproductive capacity, both groups had lived in relative peace. But as the furious Beedrill flew into Butterfree territory, the Butterfree, sensing the threat, quickly gathered as well. On the border between the 2 territories, the 2 colonies finally faced each other for the first time. Bzzz. Bzzz. Sensing the scent of her child's egg in the air, the Beedrill leader completely ignored the presence of the Butterfree. The smell of the egg clearly came from enemy territory. Fwee fwee, fwee fwee. The Butterfree leader flew out to confront the Beedrill, issuing warnings. Paying no attention to the Butterfree leader's words, the Beedrill leader let out a cry and charged into Butterfree territory. The Butterfree leader tried to stop her, but two Beedrill blocked him. Without proper preparation, the Butterfree colony wasn't fully assembled, and their numbers were much smaller than the Beedrills. Moreover, the Beedrill were full of fury, fighting with all their might. Though the Butterfree tried their best to stop them, about 10 Beedrill managed to break through the defenses. Of course, the first to break through was the Beedrill leader. Fwee fwee! The Butterfree leader screamed in desperation, but he couldn't immediately defeat the two Beedrill holding him back and could only watch helplessly as the Beedrill leader rushed deeper into his territory. Meanwhile, Cain and Murkrow were resting at their camp. The Beedrill leader's egg was wrapped in a pile of leaves and lay on the ground, while Murkrow enjoyed his favorite poke block. Cain, with his hands behind his head, had no idea that his actions had triggered a war between two great colonies. Having reached the level of a quasi-elite trainer in his past life and gained some status in Team Rocket, he no longer needed to capture Pokémon personally to trade for resources, which had led him to forget that Pokémon eggs shared a special connection with their parents. By not blocking the egg scent in time, he had only wrapped it in leaves to hide its trail. Caw! Murkrow, having stopped eating, raised his head, sensing danger approaching with his sharp instincts. Cain slowly sat up, looking curiously at Murkrow and asked, "What is it, Murkrow?" Just after asking, Cain faintly heard the buzzing of bees in the distance. His face changed, and he stared toward the north. A yellow figure gradually appeared on the horizon, followed by smaller but similar ones. "Beedrill," Cain said, recognizing the familiar silhouettes of the Pokémon he'd been dealing with in recent days. "I can't believe they followed us here. It seems we really hit a nerve." Cain couldn't help but smile when he saw the Beedrill leader. Murkrow, on the other hand, was excited, having always wanted to fight him but never getting the chance. He completely ignored the other Beedrill accompanying their leader. Cain suddenly grinned. It seemed the Beedrill colony had paid a heavy price to reach them. However, if it was only a few Beedrill, Cain and Murkrow had nothing to worry about. The Beedrill leader, suddenly losing the egg's trail, immediately spotted the two familiar figures. At that moment, all her suspicions were confirmed, and enraged, she charged toward them without hesitation. "Murkrow, get ready to fight," Cain said softly, watching the approaching figures. Caw! Murkrow, having just finished eating, let out a cry and soared rapidly into the sky. "Use Tailwind right away, and when you reach them, use Whirlwind to stop the Beedrill leader while taking out the wounded Beedrill with Astonish and Peck. After that, you'll finally get your long-awaited fight with the Beedrill leader." In the next instant, a gust of wind surrounded Murkrow, transforming him into a black shadow as the flying-type moves increased his speed. Without hesitation, he unleashed a whirlwind, forming a wall of wind that blocked the Beedrill leader's advance. The black shadow of Murkrow flickered repeatedly, his speed enhanced by training his wings. With a series of pecking attacks, he took down several wounded Beedrill, leaving them out of commission. The Beedrill leader broke through the whirlwind barrier, but 6 Beedrill in good condition remained, attacking Murkrow with fury attack. Though Murkrow dodged skillfully, he was hit by 2 Beedrill in a moment of weakness. The battle began to intensify, and Cain finally had a chance to scan the Beedrill leader. Pokémon, Beedrill, leader, light green. Gender, female. Level, 17. Type, bug/poison. Ability, swarm. Held item, leadership, can improve a Pokémon's talent by 1 rank lower. Egg moves, bug bite, pin missile. Basic moves, fury attack, rage, fury, pursuit. Learned moves, drill run, agility. Trademark moves, none. Leadership is an ability possessed only by leader Pokémon. It can improve the talent of a Pokémon and gain the loyalty of others of its species. Chapter 22, Defeating the Beedrill Leader. Upon observing the data on the Beedrill leader, Cain couldn't help but feel surprised. He had his own assumptions about the Beedrill leader's situation, but he hadn't expected something like the leadership ability. In his previous life, as a Pokémon hunter for many years, and having reached the level of a quasi-elite trainer, Cain had only encountered the leadership ability twice. This phenomenon is incredibly rare, as it can elevate a Pokémon's quality by 1 minor rank, which is extremely valuable. Moreover, as the leader of the entire colony, all the resource support is focused on this Pokémon, meaning that those with the leadership ability usually don't have insignificant achievements. In terms of Pokémon quality, there are 7 levels: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and black. However, Upon closer inspection, each color can be subdivided into 3 sub-levels based on the intensity of the color. For example, the quality of the Beedrill leader is light green, just at the lowest green level, meaning there is still a significant difference compared to green and dark green. Murkrow has green quality, though in a darker shade, very close to dark green. Without the help of special items, Murkrow may never reach the dark green level. Therefore, the Beedrill leader's original quality should have been dark yellow, but due to the leadership ability, its quality was raised to light green. As the leader's offspring, the Weedle egg with green quality is the most valuable in the entire colony. If raised properly, it could become the strongest member of the colony and even improve the overall quality of all the Beedrill. It's no wonder the Beedrill leader was so furious upon discovering that its best offspring had disappeared. This also explains why the entire Beedrill colony went into a frenzy after the egg's disappearance. Cain's actions had shaken the very foundation of the Beedrill colony, with more severe consequences than if he had eliminated a large number of Kakuna. These thoughts quickly passed through Cain's mind. Meanwhile, after taking down the injured Beedrill, Murkrow received some attacks. Although they weren't severe, they did pose a danger. Caw! Murkrow cried, its sharp screech affecting the nearby Beedrill. 2 of them were paralyzed with fear. Taking advantage of their confusion, Murkrow channeled flying energy between its wings, and with a slight flap, it used the gust ability, enveloping all the nearby Beedrill. Flying-type energy is extremely powerful against bug-type Pokémon. After releasing the gust move, Murkrow didn't stop flapping its wings, increasing the attack's damage and keeping the Beedrill leader at bay. As the intensity of the attack grew, the Beedrill trapped in the gust were hurled to the ground, knocked out. Bang! Finally, the last Beedrill fell to the ground, unable to continue the battle. With a powerful flap, Murkrow stopped the gust, and the swirling air dissipated with a dull sound. Now, only the Beedrill leader and Murkrow remained in the air. The Beedrill leader was the first to move, transforming into a white flash, its stingers aimed at Murkrow. It was the agility move. Murkrow, use Peck, Cain commanded. With the order, Murkrow's eyes narrowed, its beak glowing with a white light charged with flying energy, and it shot towards the Beedrill leader. Bang! The 2 Pokémon collided instantly and were thrown back by the force of their attacks. The Beedrill leader's body showed signs of distortion as an uncontrollable fury began to burn. It activated the Rage move, which increases its attack power when it takes damage after using a move. Cain wasn't concerned about the Beedrill leader's use of the Rage move. As long as enough distance was maintained, Murkrow would still have the advantage. Murkrow, maintain Tailwind and use Gust, Cain calmly ordered. After the first collision, the 2 Pokémon distanced themselves again. In an instant, Murkrow formed another gust and launched it toward the Beedrill leader. The Beedrill leader grew increasingly frustrated by the tornado blocking its path, charged with flying energy. With mounting fury, it rushed toward Murkrow, ignoring the gust. It quickly flailed its stingers, dispersing the wind with its fury attack move. Murkrow was startled to see the Beedrill leader ignoring its attack, but before it could react, the Beedrill leader appeared in front of it with another agility move. Murkrow, don't just stand there, use Astonish. The Beedrill leader struck fiercely with its stingers, causing intense pain to Murkrow, who, enduring the pain, let out a screech that interrupted the Beedrill leader's attack. Murkrow then retreated, keeping a safe distance. The battle continued like this, with Murkrow retreating and using Gust, while the Beedrill leader pushed through to get close and attack. This cycle repeated 7 or 8 times. Murkrow began to feel its body growing numb from the pain, and its wings felt heavy. The Beedrill leader was also exhausted, panting in the air. Despite having light green quality and a powerful body as a leader, it had endured multiple gusts, which were highly effective against its type, yet it still hadn't fallen. Its strength was truly impressive. Although the Beedrill leader's level was 3 times higher than Murkrow's, Murkrow had the advantage of speed and attack type. Cain, who had been watching and directing the battle, continued to give precise orders. Murkrow, use Roost. As both Pokémon started losing speed, whoever could last longer would be the victor. There was no denying that the Beedrill leader had remarkable abilities, worthy of a Pokémon raised with the colony's resources. At Cain's command, Murkrow descended to the ground. Its numb body nearly caused it to lose balance, but the effect of Roost quickly began to take hold. The Earth's energy flowed through its legs, spreading throughout its body, and the comforting warmth helped restore sensation to its aching body. The Beedrill leader didn't understand why its opponent had suddenly landed, but its combat instinct warned that Murkrow was recovering while it weakened. It couldn't allow this to continue. The Beedrill leader decided to attack immediately to interrupt Murkrow's recovery. Although its decision was correct, its state no longer allowed it to move as quickly as before, and it couldn't even use agility. By the time the Beedrill leader finally reached Murkrow, it had already finished recovering with Roost and opened its eyes suddenly, filled with determination. Although they were rivals, Murkrow respected the Beedrill leader as an opponent. Cain, who knew Murkrow well after so much time together, understood its intentions when he saw the look in its eyes. With a resigned smile, he said, "Murkrow, do as you wish." "Caw!" Murkrow cried, flapping its wings, and rushed toward the Beedrill leader. This time, Murkrow didn't dodge. The exhausted Beedrill leader could only attack mechanically. The blows echoed through the air as both Pokémon's bodies clashed repeatedly. Little by little, the Beedrill leader lost its strength. The fury in its eyes faded, and it saw the respect Murkrow had for it. With one final, powerful strike, Murkrow hit the Beedrill leader, who fell to the ground, unconscious. Murkrow, who had braced for an attack, stared in surprise at the Beedrill leader on the ground, finally realizing it had won. "Caw! Caw!" It cried in excitement, celebrating its victory over the strongest opponent it had ever faced. Cain approached slowly, observing the unconscious Beedrill leader on the ground. Finally, he let out a long sigh of relief. Although he had always trusted Murkrow, he couldn't help but worry until the opponent was definitively out of the fight. Suddenly, Cain was surprised and then smiled. He hadn't expected Murkrow to level up after defeating the Beedrill leader. The system responded to his thought and scanned Murkrow. Pokémon, Murkrow, green. Gender, male. Level, 15. Type, dark, flying. Ability, prankster, allows status moves to go first. Held item, none. Egg moves, punishment, feint attack, roost. Basic moves, peck, astonish, pursuit, haze, wing attack. Learned moves, snatch, tailwind, gust. Trademark moves, none. Murkrow had successfully reached level 15 and learned wing attack, a flying type move with a power of 60, now its strongest flying attack. After the euphoria, Murkrow nearly collapsed due to the side effects of roost. Its body was completely exhausted, and after so many consecutive battles, it barely had any strength left. Cain quickly caught Murkrow as it fell. With a resigned smile, he gave it a gentle pat on the head. "I told you not to be reckless. See what happened." His tone was full of affection and exasperation. Although Murkrow had lost its strength, Cain was satisfied, knowing it had defeated a formidable opponent. Chapter 23, Return. Cain gently placed Murkrow on the ground and took out the emergency healing spray, carefully spraying each of the Pokémon's wounds. Immediately, Murkrow felt a cool sensation on the wounds, and the pain began to subside. After a moment, the wound, which had regained sensitivity, started to hurt again. It was the disinfectant taking effect. While Murkrow made a sound that was uncertain whether it was of relief or irritation, Cain finished using the entire spray. After eating some poke blocks, Murkrow slowly regained control of his body and managed to stand up. Cain stopped Murkrow when he tried to fly and lifted him in his arms. With Murkrow's current weight, Cain had to exert some effort to carry him. Meanwhile, at the border between the Butterfree and Beedrill territories, the air was filled with the scent of death. On the ground, the trees, the bushes, and the fallen leaves, there were corpses of Beedrill and Butterfree everywhere. The Beedrill swarm, which initially had the advantage, lost their numerical superiority when more Butterfree arrived at the battlefield from different places. Moreover, the Butterfree leader was still in the fight, while the Beedrill leader had disappeared into the forest, leading to heavier losses for the Beedrill. As more of their members died, even the usually peaceful Butterfree became enraged and started attacking the Beedrill with all their might, resulting in even more Beedrill deaths. At the moment when Murkrow defeated the Beedrill leader, all the Beedrill seemed to sense something. The energy surrounding them suddenly vanished. For an instant, all the Beedrill froze, forgetting they were in the middle of a battle. After taking some attacks from the Butterfree, several Beedrill permanently lost their ability to fight. But despite this, the Beedrill began to scream desperately. Buzz buzz buzz! Buzz buzz buzz! They had already realized what they had lost, their leader. The aura of their leader was fading. The leader was like their king, and with the king's death, his subjects were left devastated. Some Beedrill lost their minds and, regardless of the Butterfree's attacks, tried to break through enemy lines, but fell before they could get close. More and more Beedrill went mad. Suddenly, a noticeably stronger Beedrill stopped screaming and made a few sounds toward the others. All the Beedrill shuddered, as if they had been doused with cold water on a hot day. The Beedrill, who previously seemed desolate, started to regain the light in their eyes. Finally, under the leadership of the stronger Beedrill, they began to retreat. The Beedrill that returned, after arriving with such momentum, numbered less than 100. If someone looked closely, they would notice that a sort of mysterious aura was beginning to envelop the leading Beedrill. This aura was the origin of the leadership ability. When all members of a group are tightly united, this energy appears, which eventually turns into the leadership ability. The Beedrill swarm retreated, and the Butterfree also returned to the forest with the bodies of their fallen comrades. Thus ended the fierce battle between the two species. After nearly 3 hours, Murkrow finally recovered from the side effects of Roost, and that was thanks to the poke blocks that sped up his recovery. So, while Roost is a useful move, it shouldn't be used frequently or considered a routine move. For today, and at Cain's insistence, Murkrow did not train but continued recovering under Cain's careful massage. When dawn arrived again, Murkrow had fully recovered. Cain was preparing breakfast under a tree, while Murkrow, full of energy, flew around the tree at full speed, with 2 thick branches tied to his wings. During the close combat with the Beedrill leader the previous day, Cain and Murkrow realized they needed to strengthen Murkrow's wings. After leveling up, Murkrow felt his body had grown stronger. Before, he would tire after flying 100 laps, but now, after 100 laps, he still had energy left. After a short break and eating some poke blocks prepared by Cain, Murkrow continued training. He untied the branches from his wings and began striking the tree, the sound of his blows echoing. After finishing breakfast, Cain joined the training. He started with sprints up and down a slope, followed by sit UPS and push UPS. Mornings are the best time for training, and after an exhausting session, both the human and the Pokémon collapsed on the grass, gazing at the blue sky, feeling completely relaxed. After lunch, Cain and Murkrow set off on the road back. Today was already the 6th day, and tomorrow was the day when Team Rocket would regroup. As they passed the border between the Butterfree and Beedrill territories, Cain fell silent at the devastation in the forest. He couldn't believe that a simple impulsive act had triggered a war between two species. Looking at the now ravaged forest, with corpses everywhere, Cain could imagine the magnitude of the losses for the Beedrill swarm. Not only Beedrill, but as they crossed Butterfree territory, the once visible Metapod were missing, and Butterfree had become extremely rare. For both species, the losses were enormous. After a brief reflection, Cain continued on toward Beedrill territory. Cain, who had already gone through many hardships, was used to such things. This had always been a cruel world. If you don't have enough strength, death is inevitable. That kind of useless compassion was something Cain had abandoned a long time ago. Apart from the people closest to him and his Pokémon, Cain trusted no one and showed no mercy. Compassion is for the weak, the strong are used to facing death. Cain had been a Pokémon hunter in his previous life and had witnessed far worse massacres than this. Weakness is the original sin. Upon re-entering the forest in Beedrill territory, Cain felt a sense of familiarity. However, the forest, once teeming with life, now seemed desolate. Kakuna were no longer seen in the trees. "I hope they're smart enough not to seek trouble," Cain murmured. Given the current state of the Beedrill swarm, Cain wasn't afraid of them at all. Without their leader, the Beedrill were a disorganized gang that Murkrow could easily defeat. Cain and Murkrow crossed the forest, which had once taken them nearly 2 hours to traverse, in just 1 hour. Throughout the journey, they didn't encounter a single Beedrill. It seemed they had all retreated. Cain was satisfied with the Beedrill's attitude. They could no longer offer Murkrow much in terms of experience. If they didn't cause more problems, Cain and Murkrow wouldn't pursue them. After crossing Beedrill territory, signs of other Pokémon began to appear. The return trip was almost identical to the way in. Passing the place where they had fought the trio, the signs of the battle had vanished, except for a few bloodstains on the ground. Arriving at the Zubat cave, Cain retrieved the items he had stored there and packed them into his storage belt. Originally, Cain had only planned to explore a little, but he ended up staying out for several days, though the rewards were great. Moreover, this place was still the border between the forest's peripheral and central zones, and the Pokémon here were no longer strong enough for Murkrow's training needs. Even if it wasn't for treasure hunting, Cain probably would have left this place within a day or two. Inside the cave, there were no signs of Pokémon activity, but outside the cave, footprints of various Pokémon could be seen passing through. Perhaps the accumulated fear of the Zubat had been enough to keep other Pokémon away, but sooner or later, they would enter the cave. In fact, in a few days, the cave would likely become home to other Pokémon. Cain didn't look back as he walked away from the cave. This cave was just a small stop in the lives of Cain and Murkrow, one that wouldn't leave a lasting mark. Just like this trial island, which was only another station in their lives. It may be important, but it definitely wasn't the most important. Team Rocket had managed to bring so many children to this island without anyone noticing and conduct what they called trials. So, this island wasn't just a simple island. Although the Pokémon on the island weren't high level, their quality was significantly better than those elsewhere. In the outside world, one might encounter thousands of Pokémon before finding one of excellent quality, but on this island, Cain had already found 2 outstanding Pokémon just in the Beedrill swarm. Additionally, Pokémon of decent quality were much more common here. It's likely that this was just one of many secret islands controlled by Team Rocket, and its secrets were something that Cain, even in his past life as a quasi-elite level trainer, had never had the right to know. Cain's thoughts wandered as he walked, and before the sun set, Cain and Murkrow finally arrived again at Team Rocket's base. Looking at the entrance to the base, Cain felt like he was staring at a large mouth that devoured everyone who approached. Without hesitation, he clutched the bag containing the Weedle egg against his back and disappeared into the darkness. Chapter 24, Return to the Exchange Center. Through the long entrance, as Cain entered the base, his view gradually widened. Compared to when he left, there were almost no significant changes to the entire base. The only difference was that the crowd seemed a bit thinner, and the empty base gave off a sense of desolation. It was possible that some people who had left had not yet returned. After all, tomorrow was when the real test would take place. If it weren't for the need to get rid of the valuable Pokémon egg he carried on his back, Cain wouldn't have returned so early. Compared to life in the wild, the base seemed more comfortable and safe. A person who was training their Pokémon in a corner saw Cain enter and showed an expression of joy. He quickly stopped his training and disappeared from the plaza with his small Pokémon. Cain also noticed that person out of the corner of his eye but didn't pay much attention. He was just a weakling who depended on others to survive. He headed straight to the exchange center, occasionally passing by a few people in small groups. When they saw him, they always showed slight confusion, a hint of surprise, and a touch of malicious satisfaction. In the accommodation area reserved for the testers of the base, in a room clearly larger than the others, a young man was sitting in the center of the room, smiling as he stroked the scales of an Akans coiled beside him. On either side of him, there were about 8 people, all accompanied by their Pokémon, but none dared make the slightest sound, or even look directly into the eyes of the young man sitting in the center. "Xander, Boss Xander, that boy has returned." A shadow quickly rushed from the door toward the young man, but upon reaching him, all the words he had in mind got stuck in his throat, and he finally managed to say only that one sentence. Indeed, the young man sitting in the middle of the room was Xander, first place in the first trial. According to the original course, he should also have been the undisputed winner of the base's final test. "Oh? Is it that boy who came in second place?" Hearing what the newcomer said, Xander's smile faded, and he straightened in his seat. His eyes sharpened, focusing intensely on the person who came to report. Sensing his master's murderous intent, the Akans, which had been calm until that moment, also raised its body, flicking its forked tongue and showing a cold, deadly intent in its elongated eyes. Gulp. The young man who came to report felt Xander's gaze and Akan's killer eyes, as if a sharp blade brushed against his skin. He swallowed hard, nodding stiffly, "Yes, yes, yes." Upon hearing the confirmation, Xander's body relaxed, and he leaned back in his chair. Akan's also returned to its previous position, but for some reason, the young informant felt even colder. "No wonder I took notice of him, he managed to survive out there for so long and has returned safe and sound." "Ha, ha." Xander laughed, but there was no joy in his laughter. Among the 8 people sitting below, a robust young man of about 17 or 18 suddenly stood up, speaking in a deep voice, "Boss Xander, that boy who came in second only did so with some tricks. Let me bring him to you." With that, he turned to leave. However, before he could move, Xander stopped him with his hand. "Rockwell, there's no need. I want to see how he performs tomorrow," Xander said with a smile. "Yes. The young man called Rockwell responded again in a deep voice and then sat down again. In reality, he was just pretending. If he were asked to risk his life for Xander, he wouldn't. Despite his clumsy appearance, he was shrewd inside. After Cain had left the base for a few days, Xander had openly organized his own force within the base. A key reason for this was his strength. To survive in a place like this, strength was crucial, but it wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was ruthlessness. Defeating those who opposed him, then killing their Pokémon, and finally forcing the opponent to watch as his Akans devoured them. With these ruthless actions and his great power, he quickly attracted a group of followers. In such a ruthless place, only 50 people would survive in the end. The weak would be eliminated sooner or later, so the only way to survive was to rely on a strong person, becoming their follower. If that person was strong enough to come out on top, they could ensure the lives of some of their followers. This was the mercy that Team Rocket showed to the strong. The entire test was designed to provide talent for Team Rocket. All who managed to survive would be highly valued and take on important positions in the future. Therefore, this test was a hellish battlefield, but it could also be seen as a ladder to power. If one managed to survive, they would eventually become a powerful trainer. With Team Rocket's backing, becoming someone of great influence wouldn't be impossible. Perhaps for those who belonged to the Pokémon League, following their normal growth path would make them respected Pokémon trainers, living a carefree life. But for those born as commoners, or in poverty, this might be their only chance. And most of the people brought to this island were commoners or people who couldn't even afford a proper meal, like Cain. Raised in a poor neighborhood, he ate food he found in dumpsters, so when he arrived on the island, his body was weak and thin. But there were also people like Xander, who already lived in good conditions. Coming to the island was both a way to train and a means of gaining prestige. In fact, Xander's brother is a Team Rocket officer, who also rose from the trial island. Now, he has reached a nearly high-ranking position in Team Rocket. That's why Xander, as his younger brother, didn't believe his own talent was inferior. Upon hearing about this trial from his brother, he used his influence to join the testers and be sent to the island. Also, through secret dealings, he obtained an Akans of excellent quality. As the unevolved version of Arbok, which his brother uses as his emblem, Xander knew perfectly well how to train an Akans. And he believed that his current Akans had already reached the best state possible for its level. Everything had gone smoothly so far, leading him to his current position. Perhaps influenced by his brother's personality, Xander was also an unpredictable man. After showing his cruel side, he gathered a group of followers to gain more resources and better train his Pokémon. As for who would stay or go after the final test, that would depend entirely on his mood. Xander, filled with ambition, had no intention of being just a decorative figure in Team Rocket. If he was going to do it, he was going to do it to the best of his ability. His minimum goal was to surpass his brother, and the first step to achieving that was to become an executive of Team Rocket. By becoming an executive of Team Rocket, he would have truly entered the upper ranks. Then, relying on his talent, it wouldn't be impossible to go even further. Whenever he thought about his future, Xander would get excited, licking his lips with a dark smile. Cain, who had gone straight to the exchange center, had no idea about any of this, but even if he did, he wouldn't care. In his second chance, he had only one goal, to become strong. Anyone who stood in his way would be destroyed. Xander was someone Cain had been subordinate to in his past life, someone he could never investigate or confront. But in this life, even if he knew about him, he wouldn't flinch. With his system activated ahead of time, Cain was confident he wouldn't lose to anyone. He untied the straps that secured the Pokémon egg to his back, and under the astonished gaze of the exchange clerk, he gently placed the Weedle egg on the counter. Cain decided to use this Pokémon egg to get points. Although this Pokémon might not be of poor quality when born, and as a bug type, it would grow quickly, making it useful in combat in a short amount of time, Cain decided to abandon it. This is because it was only a Pokémon egg, and there was no way to know how long it would take to hatch. If it hatched just as the trial was ending, what use would it be to Cain? Even if it hatched in a few days and Cain managed to train it, in the final battle, only one Pokémon could be used. For Cain, it would not only be of no help but would also cost him resources to train, becoming a burden. And most importantly, the lifespan of Beedrill's final evolution is too short. If Cain invested effort in training it and it became a key member of his team, due to its short lifespan, its performance would decline, eventually becoming almost useless. As for Beedrill's Mega Evolution, it's worth remembering that not even the Pokémon League knows about Mega Evolution at this time, and Mega Stones are extremely rare. Even if one were to be found by chance, what are the odds that it would be a stone specifically for Beedrill's Mega Evolution? For all these reasons, Cain decided to trade it for points, to obtain more valuable resources now, and focus on training Murkrow. Ignoring the astonished gaze of the clerk, Cain calmly said, "I want to trade this for points." Chapter 25, Pokémon Egg Exchange. Are you sure? The exchange clerk asked symbolically, looking at Cain as if he were seeing a fool. Cain nodded without responding. Although Pokémon eggs are not common in the wild, they are not impossible to find either. So why do many people choose to ignore them rather than bring them into exchange for points? You must know that if a Pokémon is born and raised with its trainer from the beginning, the bond and trust between them become very strong. This makes Pokémon eggs, with the same quality as a hatched Pokémon, often more valuable. However, since Pokémon eggs found in the wild cannot be assessed for their quality until the Pokémon hatches, people generally don't risk bringing them back. The Pokémon League scientists have already developed portable instruments that can measure Pokémon quality. Although they are extremely expensive, rich, and demanding, trainers do not hesitate to use them. However, to assess the quality of a Pokémon, you not only need to catch it, but you also must use costly materials, something most people can't afford. As for instruments to assess Pokémon egg quality, technology hasn't advanced enough to make them portable yet. Moreover, they also require significant resources. Unless it is known for sure that the egg's parents have good potential, usually, no one bothers to evaluate the quality of an egg. Even if, against all odds, an egg has yellow level quality, those who can afford these instruments wouldn't be interested in a yellow quality Pokémon. And green quality eggs are even rarer. That's why, when Cain said he wanted to exchange the Pokémon egg for points, the exchange clerk looked at him like a fool. But Cain didn't want to give more explanations. Should he say that he could evaluate that the Pokémon inside the egg had green level quality? That would likely alert even Instructor Viper at the base. Have you thought this through? Just assessing the quality of a Pokémon egg costs 100 points. Even if the egg turns out to have basic quality, it will only be worth 100 points. If you don't have enough points. The clerk trailed off, not finishing the sentence. If you don't have enough points, well, you'll have to pay with your life. In Team Rocket, there's no such thing as credit. Cain nodded again, somewhat resigned. If he didn't evaluate it, the egg would only be worth 1 point, as if it had red level quality. Seeing Cain was determined, the exchange clerk said no more. Although he didn't know why the boy was so sure, if the Pokémon inside the egg didn't reach basic quality, unless Cain could pay the 100 points, he'd have to say goodbye to it forever. Basic quality is one of the categories Team Rocket, and indeed the entire Pokémon World, uses to classify Pokémon quality. The categories are no quality, basic quality, medium quality, high quality, and superior quality. These categories correspond to red, orange, yellow, green, and higher qualities. Cain placed the Weedle egg in the evaluation machine's compartment, closing the transparent lid. He took a test tube from the shelf and poured the liquid into the machine's inlet. This liquid, known as analysis fluid, is expensive to produce, making each evaluation costly. After pressing the start button, the machine began humming to life. Ding! The first light, representing no quality, lit up immediately. All Pokémon eggs activate this light since the minimum quality of any Pokémon is red. In the blink of an eye, the second light turned on, indicating the Pokémon inside the egg had basic quality, equivalent to the orange quality detected by Cain's system. Not bad, at least it has basic quality, so you won't have to worry about covering the cost of the evaluation, the exchange clerk smiled. Cain shrugged indifferently. After all, it was just orange quality. The evaluation didn't stop there. With the basic quality light growing brighter, 10 seconds passed, and the medium quality light began to blink. The exchange clerk began looking at Cain differently. Initially, he had taken him for a fool, but it turned out to be a medium quality Pokémon egg. When a Pokémon egg reaches medium quality, the minimum exchange is 1000 points. This meant the young man was about to obtain over 1000 points. In the entire trial, this would represent a huge advantage. Aside from a few testers with existing connections, this boy could surpass everyone else with these resources. The medium quality light continued to intensify until it reached its full brightness after 30 seconds. Then, the high quality light began to shine faintly. Hi! High quality. It actually reached high quality. The exchange clerk exclaimed loudly before covering his mouth with his hand, unable to hide the astonishment in his eyes. After working for Team Rocket for so long, he knew the value of a high-quality Pokémon egg. We're talking about points in the tens of thousands. Even after all these years of work, he had never acquired that many points. This was high quality, and on top of that, it was a Pokémon egg, which is even more valuable than a wild Pokémon of the same quality that has already grown. Once this egg enters the Team Rocket exchange system, higher-ranked members will seek it out desperately. Even officers might show interest. Cain frowned, annoyed by the clerk's exclamation. This was a trial, and if anyone found out he suddenly possessed so many points, everyone would be willing to join forces to eliminate him and split his points. For those aiming to be at the top, Cain, with so many points, would become the biggest obstacle. The exchange clerk realized his mistake as well. Luckily, it was nighttime, and no one else was in the exchange center, or he might have caused serious trouble for the young man. When he looked back at Cain, there was only astonishment in his eyes, along with a trace of well-hidden greed. Though it was well concealed, Cain noticed it. Knowing full well the value of more than 10,000 points, Cain perfectly understood the temptation. Although the clerk wasn't participating in the trial, as a Team Rocket member, he could still feel greed for those points. When the evaluation machine finally stopped, the high-quality light reached its maximum brightness. Mid-high quality, almost the same level as Murkrow. On the screen, it read, Mid-high quality, Weedle. Seeing the evaluation was complete, the clerk hesitated before saying, "Sorry, but I don't have the authority to exchange a high-quality Pokémon egg. Please wait a moment." He quickly left the counter, opened a hidden door, and went inside. A few moments later, the hidden door opened again, and the clerk, who had entered before, came out with an extremely respectful attitude, bowing and holding the door open. A figure wrapped in a black robe slowly emerged from the hidden door. The mysterious figure walked with slow steps, like an elderly person, approaching the counter. End of chapter. Chapter 26, Shadow Unit. The mysterious man glanced at the Pokémon egg in the testing machine and at the blinking light representing its high quality. With a cold, emotionless voice, he asked, "How did you obtain this Pokémon egg?" The question carried a slight sense of pressure. "Sir, I found it in a Beedrill's nest. It should be the offspring of the Beedrill leader. I'm willing to offer this Pokémon egg as a gift to you," Cain replied respectfully, not daring to hide anything. Although he felt somewhat reluctant to hand over the Pokémon egg, he didn't dare to do otherwise. The mysterious man nodded in satisfaction at Cain's attitude. Waving his hand, the man said, "There's no need, and I won't take advantage of someone like you. This Weedle Pokémon egg is worth about 18,000 points, so add 20,000 points to his account and deduct it from mine." The first part was directed at Cain, and the second to the exchange operator who stood waiting nearby. "Yes," the exchange operator quickly bowed and nodded. Cain remained respectfully in place, his head lowered, without responding. The mysterious man stared at Cain for a moment before saying, "You've done well. Would you be interested in helping me with something?" Cain inhaled deeply and respectfully replied, "It would be an honor to serve you, sir. When you finish this trial, come to see me," he said, placing a black badge on the counter. "Yes," Cain responded, still with his head bowed. Out of the corner of his eye, Cain glanced at the black badge on the counter. When he got a clear look at it, Cain was stunned. Nodding once more, the mysterious man gave Cain one last look before disappearing through a hidden door. As for the Weedle Pokémon egg, someone else would take care of delivering it, there was no need for him to worry about it. The operator waited respectfully until the mysterious man had fully departed, letting out a sigh of relief, wiping the sweat from his brow. Cain also exhaled softly, putting the black badge into his storage space while receiving envious and jealous glances from the exchange operator. Staring at the black badge with mixed emotions, Cain noticed its shape resembled a cloud, completely black without any trace of impurity. The black cloud badge belonged exclusively to the most secret unit of Team Rocket, known as the Shadow Unit, which reported directly to Team Rocket's leader, Giovanni. And the only people who could grant this badge, aside from Giovanni, were the leader of the Shadow Unit and its two sub-leaders. The Shadow Unit didn't belong to Team Rocket's regular structure, all its members were personally selected by the three leaders. There was no other way to join. The three leaders of the Shadow Unit were all elite-level trainers, so the mysterious man from earlier must have been one of them. Although this badge only designated Cain as a reserve member, its significance was undeniable. If Cain fulfilled the task the mysterious man had given him, he could become an official member of the Shadow Unit. Since the Shadow Unit answered directly to Giovanni, it could be considered his main force, automatically outranking others of the same level. In other words, a soldier from the Shadow Unit ranked higher than a regular Team Rocket soldier and was equivalent to a Team Rocket captain. The legends of Team Rocket's Shadow Unit had always been passed down, but Cain had only heard of them in his previous life, never seeing any until now. Why did he choose me? Was it just because of that Pokémon egg? Cain frowned, deep in thought. It didn't make sense that during their first meeting, he would be given a reserve member's badge, especially considering that with his current strength, he shouldn't have caught the man's attention. Even if he had, Cain's current identity was just that of a trial participant. If he hadn't lived through this life again, he wouldn't have known what the badge represented. Suppressing all his guesses, Cain showed a puzzled expression and pretended to ask, "Excuse me, this badge?" The exchange operator immediately gave him a wide grin, a completely different attitude from before. "I can't say anything about that. You'll have to wait for the man himself to explain." Cain nodded and didn't ask further, storing the badge in his space. Although he had just gone through several events, he hadn't forgotten the main purpose of his visit. The Weedle Pokémon egg earned him 20,000 points, far exceeding his expectations. It was 20,000 points, enough to exchange for many useful items. Aside from the important figures on the island, Cain should now have the most points. However, having points, no matter how many, was useless if they remained unspent. He needed to convert them into power for them to have any meaning. He opened the point exchange manual and went straight to the technical machines, trademark, section. When he reached the trademark section, Cain already had a clear idea of what his Murkrow needed. First, Murkrow already had decent speed, and with the move Tailwind, he could enhance it further. As for offense, being a dark and flying type, the flying type moves Murkrow had learned were quite good and could deal effective damage. This was likely because he had mostly been battling bug-type Pokémon, which accelerated his mastery of flying-type energy. However, dark-type moves had become a weakness. Even though Murkrow's strongest talent was in the dark-type, the dark-type moves he could master required a higher level to learn. Therefore, to improve Murkrow's dark-type energy capabilities, Cain would consider choosing some dark-type moves. Additionally, while Murkrow was very fast, he might encounter other equally fast Pokémon with high attack power capable of defeating him in one hit. Even if that didn't happen, in group battles, Murkrow, being fragile, would be an easy target. Thus, Cain prioritized selecting survival moves. Also, Murkrow's special ability is Prankster, which allows him to use status moves with priority. It's a very powerful ability, and not taking advantage of it would be a waste. Suddenly, he remembered something and pulled out a silver box from his storage belt. It was the box he had dug up from a treasure map, and inside was a trademark, probably a normal type move, though he didn't know which move it was. He placed the box on the counter and said to the now friendly exchange operator, "Could you tell me what move this is?" The exchange operator, somewhat curious, opened the box. Upon seeing the trademark inside, he showed an expression of understanding and couldn't help but think, "This kid is lucky." He placed the trademark into the teaching device, and an electronic screen displayed the information. He didn't block Cain from seeing it, so Cain also read, "Move, Screech, normal type, status move." The description read, "Emits a loud screech that makes the opponent want to cover their ears, significantly lowering their defense." Cain was delighted to see that the move was Screech. He had gotten lucky again, as it was a useful move. While not as valuable as Protect or Substitute, it was still fairly rare. And it was perfect for Murkrow. Screech could significantly lower the opponent's defense, which was ideal for Murkrow. After all, Murkrow's special ability is Prankster, allowing him to use status moves with priority, and Screech is precisely one of those moves. Cain had already been considering exchanging for some status moves to enhance Murkrow's combat ability. Now, with Screech, Cain could save some points. No wonder the exchange operator had thought of Cain's luck when he saw the trademark. Cain smiled slightly at Murkrow, knowing that after this exchange, Murkrow's combat ability would increase by at least one level. End of chapter. Chapter 27, Trademark Exchange. Cain refocused on the exchange manual, searching for the moves he needed. "I want to exchange for these two moves," Cain said, pointing at the moves in the manual. The manual described the following. Move, protect. Type, normal. Category, status. Power, 0. Description, forms a protective shield around the body, completely blocking the opponent's attacks for a limited time. Cannot be used consecutively, the cooldown time is 10 minutes. Price, 5,000 points. Move, substitute. Type, normal. Category, status. Power, 0. Description, sacrifices some of the user's HP to create an identical substitute that takes the hit in place of the user. If the attack's intensity doesn't exceed the substitute's endurance, it can remain on the field. Price, 4,000 points. The total for both moves came to 9,000 points, proving that moves are extremely expensive. Cain was quite fortunate this time, obtaining a valuable Pokémon egg with green aptitude. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know if he could exchange for Protect after leaving this trial. Seeing Cain exchange for 2 such expensive moves without showing any emotion, the exchange officer couldn't help but tremble a little. Does he have no idea how valuable his points are? He thought. Though he mumbled to himself internally, his hands moved without pause. He opened a safe that contained various moves and carefully took out 2 trademark discs emitting a white glow, handing them to Cain. This is the difference in thinking between people. To Cain, points are nothing but useless numbers if they aren't converted into effective combat power. Only by turning points into strength can their value be maximized. If Cain's Murkrow could master the moves Protect and Substitute, its survivability would increase significantly. Coupled with its original speed, as long as it didn't face opponents with a vast power gap, it would have a decent chance of winning. With 11,000 points remaining, Cain decided to exchange for a Dark-type move for his Murkrow. Flipping through the pages filled with normal-type moves, he went directly to the Dark-type section. Without much hesitation, he exchanged for Dark Pulse, which cost 3,000 points. As a Dark-type offensive move, Dark Pulse has decent power and high accuracy, with the added bonus of potentially causing the opponent to flinch. With 8,000 points left, Cain decided to save them for now. Exchanging for 3 moves at once, plus the Screech trademark he already had, would allow Murkrow to learn 4 moves in one go. Although he could exchange for more, rushing the learning process wouldn't be wise. There's a significant difference between just learning a move and mastering it. What Murkrow needed now wasn't more moves but to focus on mastering the ones it already knew to the point of using them instinctively. Also exchange for a training device that allows free weight control, for flying-type Pokémon. The weight limit should be 30 kg, Cain said after some thought. During this time, Murkrow had been using wood as a weight tool. Though it worked, it wasn't ideal to constantly search for heavier wood as it adapted to the weight. Luckily, Team Rocket scientists had stumbled upon research into such a device. Though they couldn't replicate it exactly, they had created one that allowed for adjustable weight control. It had become one of the various training devices of Team Rocket, proving to be quite useful. The weight device doesn't use much advanced technology, so its price wasn't high. The 30 kg limit device cost only 200 points. Give me 10 Great Ball as well, Cain said after storing everything in his storage belt. Each Great Ball cost 50 points, totaling 500 points. Although Cain hadn't originally intended to catch more Pokémon on the island, after speaking with the mysterious man, he decided that training other Pokémon was necessary. The final trial wouldn't be hard for Cain, aside from Xander and 2 or 3 others who might be a challenge, the rest wouldn't pose much of a threat. But now the situation was different. Cain not only had to face the final trial but also take care of the small matters the mysterious man had mentioned before the final trial began. What seemed like a small matter to the mysterious man could be a huge challenge for Cain, so training more Pokémon was essential. After storing the 10 Great Ball, Cain handed his ID card to the exchange officer. The officer swiped it through a machine, and the remaining 7,200 points were stored on the card. Cain spent a total of 12,700 points, plus an additional 100 points for the Pokémon Egg appraisal. In a corner of the exchange center stood a lone machine, a Pokémon learning machine. This machine allowed TMS to transfer move information directly into a Pokémon's brain, making them learn the move instantly. It was one of the most advanced technologies in the Pokémon world. Using the learning machine was free. However, before using the TMS, Cain took out a Great Ball and switched Murkrow's original Pokeball for the new one. For the interior space of a Pokeball, it was like moving from a small apartment to a mansion. Although Murkrow rarely stayed inside its Pokeball, when you have the money, it's better to give it a good place to rest, even if it doesn't use it much. After storing Murkrow in the newly acquired Great Ball, Cain placed it in the slot of the learning machine. Then, he took the TMS from his storage space and inserted them one by one. Luckily, it was nighttime, and there was no one else in the exchange center aside from Cain and the exchange officer. Otherwise, if someone had seen Cain use 4 TMS at once, they probably wouldn't have been able to resist shouting, "What a waste!" For most Pokémon, learning too much at once could backfire. But for a green-quality Murkrow, mastering these moves was only a matter of time. After using the discs, they turned into ordinary, worthless discs. Each trademark took 1 minute to use. After finishing, Cain released Murkrow from the Great Ball. Caw! Murkrow immediately flew out, flapping its wings. Although the interior space of the Great Ball was vast, it never felt as comfortable as being outside. Cain gently stroked Murkrow's feathers and asked, "How did it go? Did you learn everything?" Although he knew there wouldn't be a problem, he couldn't help but ask. Caw! Caw! Murkrow quickly nodded. It felt like something magical, the moves it didn't know before had suddenly appeared in its mind as if it had known them from birth. To demonstrate, Murkrow squinted its eyes, and a light green energy shield appeared, enveloping its body. The shield lasted for about 2 seconds before fading. "Protect," Cain said with a smile. He was quite familiar with the move Protect. When a certain level of skill is reached, nearly every Pokémon must learn Protect, as it's an invaluable survival move that can prevent damage. Seeing the light green shield disappear so quickly, Murkrow tried to use it again but couldn't. Cain raised his hand to stop Murkrow, who was about to try again, and said with a smile, "This move can only be used once every 10 minutes. Come on, let's head back." Cain and Murkrow then left the exchange center, disappearing into the darkness of the night. The exchange officer watched Cain's back as he left and couldn't help but murmur, "What a lucky kid, catching that man's attention." However, what he didn't know was that Cain was more familiar with the mysterious man and his team than he was. The only question was whether this would be a blessing or a curse. Inside the Team Rocket base, there are always 300 rooms prepared for trial participants, which never change. Each door has a number corresponding to each person. Walking through the base at night, barely any shadows could be seen. Only the outlines of Cain and Murkrow stretched under the moonlight. The dormitory rooms were arranged neatly, and Cain quickly found his own. Although he had never been there before, the room was relatively clean, with a simple single bed, a small desk, and a chair. That was all. The dorm had quite austere, but for someone like Cain, who had been sleeping outdoors, having a soft bed was enough. Cain locked the door and collapsed onto the bed, enjoying the softness he hadn't felt in a long time. Murkrow, being in a human room for the first time, began curiously flying around the room. In the central room of the Team Rocket base, where the trial supervisor was, Chief Instructor Viper was in his office, with the same 2 people sitting across from his desk. Viper held a luxury ball in his hand, gently wiping off invisible dust with a handkerchief, looking at the ball with eyes that seemed to be gazing at a lover, and said to himself, "I've heard there's a boy who caught your interest." The mysterious man, sitting across from him, hidden in his black cloak, remained motionless like a monk in meditation, not responding to Viper's question. Chapter 28, The Test resumes. The silent atmosphere between the two didn't hold even the slightest sense of discomfort. It didn't surprise the mysterious man in the least that Viper had quickly found out what he had done. After all, this place was Viper's territory, and everyone here was his subordinate. If he hadn't known about it, now that would have been surprising. After a moment, a faint hum came from the mysterious man's mouth. Upon hearing the mysterious man's response, Viper smiled. Combined with the scar on his face, it was the kind of smile that could definitely stop children from crying. Both were quite renowned. As one of Team Rocket's high-ranking members, Viper had a certain understanding of the mysterious man's identity and the shadow unit he belonged to. Since the mysterious man had taken notice of Cain, it meant there was something unique about him. However, since the mysterious man didn't mention it, Viper didn't ask. As if he had sensed Viper's thoughts, the mysterious man hesitated for a moment and said, "I can sense a darkness coming from that boy, and also a faint hint of familiarity." He paused, and his tone became more solemn. "He gives me the feeling that he's like him." Viper, who had been leisurely cleaning his luxury ball, suddenly froze when he heard the mysterious man's last word, as if someone had pressed a pause button. Both remained motionless. After a moment, Viper's hand trembled slightly before he resumed polishing his ball. Anyone observant could notice that the mysterious man's words had greatly impacted him. The way he handled the ball revealed the turmoil within him. Knowing that he had touched on something important, the mysterious man remained silent. "It's truly surprising," Viper said after a long while. Indeed, it was surprising. The person the mysterious man was referring to was none other than the leader of the Shadow Unit, an individual directly under Giovanni's command, the most mysterious figure in Team Rocket, with a status just below Giovanni himself. In comparison, the 3 commanders, the 4 generals, and the 3 beasts couldn't come close to his position. He was, in essence, a person subordinate to one but wielding authority over thousands. Moreover, while outsiders only knew about the 3 powerful commanders, the invincible 4 generals, and the terrifying 3 beasts of Team Rocket, they were unaware of the Shadow Unit's existence, a unit even more mysterious and fearsome than the others. Since he didn't want to continue on that subject, Viper coughed lightly to hide his unease. "They say you got a high-quality Pokémon egg from him, right?" Quite in sync, even the mysterious man being the deputy leader of the Shadow Unit didn't want to delve into matters concerning his direct superior. He nodded slightly and pulled out a Pokémon egg from his cloak, the green Weedle egg Cain had used to trade for points. "Weedle," Viper said, identifying the egg at a glance. He extended his hand, which only had 2 fingers, and placed it on the egg, feeling the warmth it emitted. "Yes, it's a Weedle. Its final evolution is Beedrill, which will serve me as a transitional Pokémon." The mysterious man didn't hide anything. After escaping from the powerful trainers of the League, he had lost 3 of his main Pokémon, and the others were severely injured as well. They needed time to recover, and he had no plans to use them in battle unless absolutely necessary. Its growth cycle is quick, and it can become an effective combatant soon. With some training, it can reach a near elite level. Although its lifespan is short, it's enough to use it as a transitional Pokémon, the mysterious man continued. He was fully aware of Beedrill's weaknesses but didn't intend to train it as a main Pokémon, he only needed it as a temporary solution. "Do your Pokémon still need a lot of time to recover?" Viper asked curiously. Although he knew they were severely injured, he hadn't expected him to need to train a new one to replace them. The mysterious man remained silent for a moment before sighing softly. "That's to be expected when you face an elite-level poison-type trainer. I don't know when they'll fully recover, so I'll treat this Beedrill as a backup plan." Upon hearing this, Viper understood the situation and didn't ask further, continuing to polish his luxury ball. Once again, the two fell into silence. The night passed in the blink of an eye. During the night, Cain and Murkrow didn't stop their training, only this time it took place in their small cabin rather than the expansive forest. Cain personally equipped the weight gear he had acquired onto Murkrow. When inactive, the device was very light, like the weight of clothing. The weight device resembled a small backpack that could be freely adjusted to fit perfectly. Cain tested it to ensure it wouldn't fall off. The device was small and fit snugly to Murkrow's body, hidden well beneath his feathers. Unless someone got up close and looked closely, it was almost impossible to notice. Cain adjusted the weight of the device using a remote, setting it to around 5 kilograms, which was the weight Murkrow was used to during his training. When the device was activated, Murkrow felt his body grow heavier and had to exert more effort to flap his wings and fly as before. However, compared to the wooden weights he used to tie to his wings, this new device was much more comfortable, as the weight was evenly distributed across his body, allowing for more balanced training. After a few adjustments, Murkrow adapted to the new gear, which was far better than the wood. "We'll keep it at this weight for now. Increasing it too quickly isn't good. Once you get used to it, we'll gradually raise it," Cain said, smiling as he watched Murkrow adapt to the new device. "From today on, unless necessary, you'll keep this weight on all the time. You need to get used to it gradually." Cain appreciated Murkrow's attitude, always striving to grow stronger. Though he himself was eager to constantly improve, he also cared about the desires of his Pokémon. If Murkrow had been a Pokémon that didn't enjoy battling, Cain wouldn't have forced him, but he would likely have looked for a Pokémon more suited to his needs. "Caw! Caw!" Murkrow cawed enthusiastically, feeling stronger already with the device on. After a simple morning training session, Cain prepared some poke blocks for Murkrow and settled his own breakfast with some dried rations. When he left his room, the sun had already risen, and the doors of the surrounding cabins were starting to open one by one. People came out, all heading toward the central plaza of the base. Today was the 7th day again, the day of the second test. Almost everyone had returned, and the crowd was gathering in the plaza. Team Rocket staff also began to appear, and the low-ranking soldiers responsible for maintaining order were trying their best to fulfill their duties. After a week, out of the original 150 people, approximately 120 remained. The other 30 either hadn't made it back from the forest, or they never would. Those who remained showed faces that had once been naive but were now cold and hardened. Their eyes reflected a certain coldness and madness. The cruel test had devoured their kindness, beauty, and innocence. The crowd in the plaza was clearly divided into 4 areas. Most were in the section where Cain stood. Most of these people were alone, though some were in pairs, keeping a wary eye on each other. This group made up almost half of the remaining participants. The second largest group was to the south of the plaza, led by Xander, whom Cain recognized. Several strong individuals were gathered around him. When Cain looked in that direction, his eyes met Xander's, who had been watching him for a while. Xander flashed him a malicious smile before turning his gaze away. Cain didn't pay him much attention. The third largest group was to the west, led by a woman whose Pokémon was a Zubat, noticeably larger than average. Cain remembered her specifically because of that oversized Zubat. The smallest group was in the eastern corner, composed of only 9 people, led by a young man with a bright smile. Although his appearance seemed harmless, Cain couldn't help but notice the coldness in his eyes. He was a smiling tiger. The 8 surrounding him were deceived by his appearance. If they had been in the Pokémon League, they might have been pillars of the organization. But this was Team Rocket, and this was the test island, where the mortality rate was extremely high. As time passed, the crowd in the plaza began to quiet down. Instructor Viper, accompanied by his subordinates, moved to the center of the raised platform. Unlike before, there were now 2 chairs on the platform. Viper sat in one, while a mysterious hooded man, who was at the end of the group, took the other. The mysterious man. Cain narrowed his eyes. It was the same person who had given Cain the member badge in preparation for the Shadow unit. I didn't expect him to be here as well, Cain thought as he saw the mysterious man. As if sensing Cain's gaze, the mysterious man turned his attention toward him. Although his face was hidden under the cloak, Cain felt that he was being watched. After a few seconds, Cain felt the mysterious man look away and let out a sigh of relief. Facing a trainer of this caliber with his current power level still put some pressure on him. Chapter 29, Easily First. When the mysterious man sat down, Viper began observing the situation in the plaza. After seeing the expressions on everyone's faces, he nodded with satisfaction. Now, the expressions and behaviors of the participants had more of the look of true competitors in a test. A week earlier, they all seemed like children playing. Viper completely ignored the reduction in numbers. Compared to previous years, the number of participants was still high. In fact, this was one of the highest quality intakes. In the end, only 50 people could pass, and that was the maximum limit. In all previous trials, that number was rarely reached. In the edition with the fewest participants, only around 20 people made it through. Now, after passing the initial phase, which was also the hardest part, more than 120 people remained, leaving Viper quite satisfied. With a glance at his assistant, he indicated that they could begin the second trial. The content and method of the second test were almost identical to the first. It was a test of attack power. Although this type of test couldn't fully reflect a participant's skill, if they couldn't even achieve an acceptable level of attack, how could they speak of true strength? During the staff's explanation, Cain learned that although the trial was exactly the same as before, a new rule had been added. From now on, whoever came in last would be immediately eliminated. The plaza immediately filled with commotion. Eliminated directly for finishing last? Cain frowned slightly. This rule directly targeted those attempting to exploit the system. While only 50 people would pass the final test, not everyone who failed would lose their life. Obviously, Team Rocket wouldn't conduct business at a loss. As long as they survived to the end and achieved an acceptable level of skill, they could still start as low-level servants. Although they wouldn't receive any additional resources, at least they'd keep their lives, wouldn't they? Plus, if they managed to catch the attention of an important figure, they might even rise further. But now, with this new rule, those who wanted to rely on the strong and stay in the base until the end were bound by an unyielding chain. If they weren't careful and finished last, they'd be eliminated immediately. It was like a herd of sheep in the savannah. When chased by lions, the slowest one was always the first to die, so the herd ran faster and faster. No one wanted to be last. The survival of the fittest in nature. Now, Team Rocket had become the lion of the savannah, and the participants were the sheep, whoever lagged behind would become food. The noise in the plaza grew louder, and the most anxious were the weakest. Silence! Viper frowned and roared angrily. As a powerful figure who had climbed over countless corpses, what he hated most were the senseless complaints of the weak. If you don't want to take the test, don't. You'll all be treated as if you came in last. With Viper's fury, those who had been frantically discussing immediately fell silent. No one wanted to anger this man who held their lives in his hands. Under the organization of the Team Rocket soldiers, they nervously began lining up, though no one wanted to be first, as that meant facing the unknown. What if those who came after had higher scores? The test wasn't starting, and Viper's face grew darker. Noticing Viper's expression, the Team Rocket soldiers present grew sterner, glaring at the participants with more ferocity. They understood better than these still naive participants just how terrifying Viper could be. TCH, how slow. I'll go first. The one who spoke was Xander, showing disdain as he walked to the front of the line with his Akans. With someone taking the lead, the others began lining up gradually, following the established direction. For the strong, the order in the line didn't matter at all. According to Team Rocket's organization, Cain was assigned a position toward the back of the line. Now, let the test begin, announced the test supervisor next to the measuring stone. As the first in line, Xander didn't hesitate at all and walked step by step toward the stage, with Akans following closely, flicking its forked tongue. Akans, as a fierce Pokémon, constantly emanated a sense of danger. Akans, use bite. SSS. Akans flicked its tongue and its coiled body suddenly shot forward. Its two fangs gleamed with a dark light as it explosively bit the test stone. After the attack, it quickly withdrew without pausing. Akans' execution efficiency was flawless. After an attack, it always returned to its initial position. Though Xander was arrogant, his training of the Pokémon was commendable. Attack value, 258. Announced the presenter with surprise in his eyes upon seeing Xander and Akans' data. Immediately, the plaza was filled with exclamations. No wonder Xander is the leader, his attack value reached 258 points, almost triple the 98 from the first time. Exclaimed one of Xander's underlings from below the stage. Wow, starting off with such a high score. Another person shouted in surprise. This is troublesome, commented someone feeling the pressure. Amid the murmurs of the crowd, Xander smiled and calmly stepped off the stage. Then, according to the line order, participants stepped up one by one to take the test. After completing the test, some showed joy and excitement, while others looked sad and worried. Each time someone finished the test and found themselves in last place, their face turned pale, clenching their hands tightly, sweat beading on their forehead as they stared intently at the next participants, praying internally for someone with a lower score to appear. And when finally someone did score lower, that person would breathe a sigh of relief, almost collapsing to the ground. The one taking their place at the bottom would repeat the same actions, anxiously awaiting someone with a worse result. As the tests progressed, most participants had already been evaluated. So far, first place remained Xander with 258 points. Second place was a girl named Jasmine, who had been in the west corner of the plaza and owned an unusually large Zubat. Her score was 227. Third place was a lone participant with a common face, his Pokémon was a Poochyena, and he scored 225 points. As a solo participant, being only 2 points below Jasmine surprised many. Fourth place was the young man Cain had earlier labeled a smiling tiger. This young man kept a bright smile at all times, deceiving everyone around him. His name was Saurus, and his Pokémon was a coughing, scoring 215 points. Thanks to his friendly appearance, Saurus attracted several solo participants to join his team, forming a sizable group of followers. With no more surprising results, it was finally Cain's turn for the test. Xander, who was waiting on the side, upon seeing it was Cain's turn, put aside his scornful smile, and his face grew more serious. Even Viper and the mysterious man seated on the platform directed their attention toward him. This young man, who had surprised many before, what score would he achieve this time? As Cain stepped onto the stage, some also recognized him. It's him. Last time he got second place using some tricks, someone exclaimed, recognizing Cain. So that's him. I wonder what his score will be today. Pfft, what score could he possibly get? This time, those tricks won't work, someone said bitterly, recalling how Cain had taken second place in the first test, bumping him from 10th to 11th and costing him 100 points. But that Murkrow doesn't look weak, someone with a good eye commented, noting that just by its size, one could sense the Pokémon's strength. Ignoring all the comments, Cain calmly said, Murkrow, use wing attack with all your might. Caw. Murkrow flapped its wings upon hearing the command, let out a cry, and soared quickly. The powerful flying-type energy concentrated under its control in its wings. Boom! Without any pause or tricks, Murkrow's wing attack firmly struck the test stone. After a moment, a line appeared on the stone, attack value, 265. The presenter, surprised by the result, swallowed involuntarily, and after a brief pause, announced, attack value, 265 points, currently in first place. Next. The crowd below the stage was stunned. In their impression, Cain had always been someone who had gotten second place in the first test through tricks, with real ability similar to theirs. But this test left many with their jaws dropped. They had to remember that Cain was a solo participant, with no subordinates helping him find resources, growing entirely by his own means. Upon seeing Cain's result, Xander was also shocked. He had had a confrontation with Cain and knew that he wasn't the opportunist others said, but someone with real skill. Even though he had rated Cain highly, he hadn't expected his score to be even higher than his. Could it be that training in the wild really makes you grow faster? Xander began to question his own decisions. Was it better to gather a group of people to help him grow, or to head out into the wild for training? Chapter 30, Killing a Chicken to Scare the Monkeys. In truth, Xander's subordinates were the most terrified, especially those who had been clamoring to capture Cain the day before. They were sweating cold, thankful that Xander had stopped them before they did anything extreme. Due to Cain's performance, Xander probably wouldn't dare to send anyone to trouble him in the future. Although the results of an exam don't fully reflect a person's strength, they do reveal part of it. Besides, who could withstand such a high attack power? Cain had no knowledge of or interest in others' opinions or reactions. From the moment he activated the system, it meant that none of the other participants could keep up with him. This was part of his confidence. Cain descended from the stage with his Murkrow and headed to a corner, leaning against the wall and closing his eyes to rest. He wasn't interested in knowing the results of the others. In the stands, Viper frowned. He wasn't surprised by Cain's result, for if someone caught the attention of the person next to him, wasn't such a result normal? In fact, he thought it was even a bit low. However, he had a suspicion. That Murkrow, seems like. Viper voiced his doubts to the mysterious man beside him. The mysterious man understood Viper's suspicion. After a brief surprise, he nodded and, with a hoarse voice from under his black cloak, said, "You're not mistaken, it's still carrying weight." Viper had been almost certain of his assumption but was amazed at how much Cain had improved that Murkrow, which originally had deficiencies. Adjusting his posture, Viper said, "Oh? Well, this kid's not bad. If your shadow unit doesn't choose him, why not give him to me?" The mysterious man smiled slightly under his hood and replied, "What do you think?" Viper pouted, disappointed. "You're so boring. You people from the shadow unit always take things so seriously." Viper understood the rules of the shadow unit. As long as a mission from the shadow unit wasn't completed, no member of Team Rocket could intervene, unless the mission failed or the chosen candidate died. Since Cain accepted the reserve member badge of the shadow unit, he was already considered partially part of the team. Members of the shadow unit were usually very reserved, even with others from Team Rocket. However, the mysterious man and Viper were an exception. They had been good friends before joining Team Rocket. So, as long as Cain didn't complete his mission with the shadow unit or wasn't declared a failure, no other department within Team Rocket had the right to recruit him, not even High Command. This was a rule personally established by Giovanni, the leader of Team Rocket. As their most powerful force, each member of the shadow unit was carefully selected. "Watch what you say, Viper." The mysterious man's voice grew more serious. Although they were good friends, the mysterious man had deep respect for the shadow unit, and even greater devotion to Giovanni. Even Cain respected Giovanni from the bottom of his heart. Giovanni's charisma was the highest Cain had ever seen in his life. Whether being stern or kind, Giovanni handled interpersonal relationships perfectly, and his ability to command his subordinates was masterful. Had Cain been born into this world and raised within Team Rocket, he would undoubtedly have become one of Giovanni's most loyal followers. However, Being a time traveler who knew the plot, Cain had an innate resistance to Giovanni. Even so, in his previous life, Cain deeply respected and admired Giovanni. It's worth remembering that a decade ago, Team Rocket was just a small organization in the Kanto region, led by Giovanni's mother. At the time, Team Rocket didn't have much power. If wealth had been abundant, who would have chosen Weedle as their child starter Pokémon? Though in the end, that Beedrill became the strongest in the world, the resources invested in it could have been enough to raise several pseudo-legendaries. In short, a decade ago, Team Rocket was a small regional organization, but in just 10 years, Giovanni turned it into the largest criminal organization in Kanto. All other criminal groups were either eliminated or absorbed. In Kanto, aside from the Pokémon League, the largest and most powerful organization was Team Rocket. This demonstrates how capable Giovanni is. Not only is he a competent leader, but also a formidable fighter. He can face off against a champion in direct combat and hold his ground, earning him the title of the King of the Earth in the Shadows, a nickname not given lightly. Since Giovanni became the leader of Team Rocket, the Shadow Unit was the first department he created. Given his charisma, how could the members of the Shadow Unit not idolize him? Viper knew he had touched a sensitive topic with the mysterious man and wasn't bothered by his warning. To the other departments within Team Rocket, each member of the Shadow Unit was seen as a fanatic, willing to do anything, so it was best not to provoke them. After a brief conversation, both fell silent. The tests continued quickly, each person only had to make their Pokémon attack the testing stone and then record the data. Soon, everyone had finished. The final results were as follows: no one surpassed Cain's result. First place, attack, 265 points, Cain. Second place, attack, 258 points, Xander. Third place, attack, 227 points, Jasmine. Fourth place, attack, 225 points, Alec. Fifth place, attack, 215 points, Saurus. Last place, attack, 45 points. The top positions didn't change much, Cain and Xander continued to lead all participants. The point difference between second and third place showed that the two had already distanced themselves from the rest. The last place only scored 45 attack points. Even in the first test, they had only been in the middle of the pack. Although their Pokémon was a Rattata, if it had been trained and raised well, it could have also reached an explosive attack level. Hadn't someone with a Rattata ranked in the top 10 of this test? The last participant, with a pale face, stood motionless, waiting in vain for someone to score lower. He muttered continuously that it wasn't possible, that it couldn't be. Finally, when Team Rocket soldiers with malicious intent approached and grabbed his hands, ready to take him away, he reacted. He struggled violently, but his untrained body couldn't do anything against the two experienced soldiers, whose iron hands gripped him tightly. No. 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 Give me another chance. Give me another chance. He cried, begging, but it had no effect. With snot and tears running down his face, and a yellow stain appearing between his legs, the unpleasant smell spread. It was all in vain. When he had been enjoying life at the base, he should have expected this outcome. Rattata, come save me. He finally remembered that he was a trainer and had a Pokémon. However, before Rattata could act, two Mytaina appeared in front of it, baring their teeth and staring intently. Although Rattata wanted to save its trainer, it didn't dare move. Everything's settled, right? Viper, who had been watching from the beginning, showed no emotion, even feeling somewhat irritated. He despised those who wasted resources and lacked ambition. Rattata, which could have been valuable if trained, ended up in the hands of a useless person. Wasn't that a waste of resources? Under the ruthless fangs of the Mytaina, Rattata lost its life. Seeing his last hope die, the last ranked participant stopped resisting as well. Team Rocket soldiers dragged him out of everyone's sight, and no one doubted what his fate would be. In front of everyone, Team Rocket once again displayed its brutality, treating human lives as worthless. Cain, leaning against the wall, watched without the slightest disturbance. After all, it was just a life. He had killed dozens of people, any member of Team Rocket had several kills under their belt. If anyone thought Team Rocket was like in the cartoon, where they were defeated with one hit, they were truly just watching a cartoon. Killing a chicken to scare the monkeys, a good tactic, Cain thought. Cain understood the reason behind Viper's action. It was nothing more than a way to put a chain on those who merely ate and waited to die. No one can stay still in a fast current. If you don't move forward, you perish. For the strong present, there was no emotional reaction, only mild contempt. After all, this had nothing to do with them. It's like the catfish effect. If you put sardines in a net, they will all die quickly. But if you introduce a catfish, the sardines, threatened by the catfish, will swim frantically, allowing them to reach the market alive, where they will be sold at a high price. Now, they were like the sardines, and Team Rocket was the catfish. Only under the pressure of the catfish could they survive and reach a high value. Only with this pressure could the participants grow stronger, and Team Rocket reap more talents with potential. Chapter 31, Rejection. The test's conclusion was quite uneventful. The top 10 participants stepped onto the stage and swiped their identification cards through the magnetic strip, each receiving a reward of 200 points. For others, 200 points might be considered a significant amount of resources, but for Cain, who still had over 7,000 points, it was merely an additional resource. However small it might be, it still had value. In reality, Team Rocket tightly controls the distribution of points. Cain had only been lucky to stumble upon a green-quality Pokémon egg, and with the system's help, he was able to recognize its value and quickly earn 20,000 points. This type of success isn't easy to replicate. The main way to earn points within Team Rocket remains through completing missions. Completing missions is the most stable source of points. Capturing rare Pokémon or finding rare items to exchange for points are things that depend on each person's luck and skill. Cain's advantage lies in having the system. As long as rare quality Pokémon appear in front of him, they cannot escape his scan. Therefore, his most stable way to earn points would be capturing various Pokémon. The only thing that could limit him is luck. However, some things must be done in moderation. If Cain were always capturing rare Pokémon to exchange for points, what would others think? Someone who can identify a Pokémon's quality without instruments, wouldn't they be taken to a lab to be studied? Therefore, it's important to know when to stand out and when to keep a low profile. That's the best way to act. With the end of the test, the crowd gradually dispersed. Everyone wore a serious expression. What had just happened was like a ticking time bomb, constantly reminding them of the need to push themselves. After this, everyone would surely intensify their efforts. If not, they would die. Viper and the mysterious cloaked figure left the square as soon as the test ended, surrounded by Team Rocket soldiers. Given their positions and status, they wouldn't pay much attention to these minor matters, as they had subordinates to handle everything. If it weren't for the fact that the quality of each group of participants affects Viper's annual earnings, he wouldn't even bother with a group of novices. Besides assessing the quality of the participants, the mysterious figure also wanted to learn more about Cain. Although he had given Cain the reserve member badge of the Shadow Unit, he didn't really know Cain well. He took advantage of the test to observe him a little, and based on the results, Cain met his minimum standards. As Cain prepared to leave, Xander and his group blocked his path. Caw. Seeing someone approach with bad intentions, the first to react was Murkrow. Flying into the air, it let out a threatening cry at Xander. Icans. Xander's snake didn't fall behind, coiling its body in a threatening posture, ready to attack at any moment. Cain gently stroked Murkrow's feathers, signaling it not to worry too much. Seeing Cain's gesture, Xander raised an eyebrow and calmed his Icans as well. With a slight glint in his eyes, Cain used the system to scan Icans. Pokémon, Icans, green. Gender, male. Level, 16. Type, poison. Ability, intimidate. Held item, none. Egg moves, pursuit, poison fang, scary face. Basic moves, wrap, leer, poison sting, bite, glare. Learned moves, snatch. Trademark moves, double team. Actually, Xander's Icans wasn't weak and had been trained very well. The reason its performance was slightly inferior to Murkrow's was that Icans had a green quality, slightly lower than Murkrow's, and Icans' base stats weren't as high. Although base stats are only a theoretical concept and good training can compensate for this difference, it can't be denied that the distinction exists. That's why there's a difference between pseudo-legendary Pokémon and regular ones. Is there really no difference between a Dragonite and an Arbok? Of course, there is. Cain was surprised to see that Icans had learned Double Team. He remembered that the exchange price for it was 1,000 points. He hadn't expected Xander to gather that many points in a week, probably with the help of his subordinates. Both fell into an awkward silence, waiting for the other to speak first. With the two strongest leaders silent, Xander's subordinates didn't dare say a word either. Those who had wanted to teach Cain a lesson the previous day were now quiet, staring at the ground, not daring to provoke him. "I didn't expect to underestimate you in the end," Xander said seriously, unable to hold back any more. Xander had thought that no one in the entire test could compare to him, and his absolute confidence reflected in his performance. Without Cain's interference, Xander would have smoothly risen to the top. Even a high-ranking position within Team Rocket wouldn't have been impossible. In Cain's previous life, Xander had only missed that by one step. Cain understood Xander's thoughts. Someone who believed they were the protagonist but had now been surpassed would surely feel greater frustration than they showed. However, while Cain understood Xander's thoughts, he wouldn't change his attitude. Now, Xander barely had the right to be considered his rival. "So what?" Cain replied indifferently, his expression unchanged. Xander's face gradually darkened. Cain's carefree attitude made him feel belittled. As Xander's expression changed, his subordinates lowered their heads, avoiding the situation. Normally, in such a situation, Xander's cronies would have immediately jumped in to reprimand Cain. But facing someone who had surpassed Xander stopped them. They didn't want to get into trouble. Xander quickly realized the behavior of his subordinates, which only darkened his expression further. Cain didn't harbor any particular enmity toward Xander, he simply stood there, waiting for Xander's next move. After an internal struggle, Xander realized that his greatest backing now was his brother, an officer of Team Rocket. But as someone who had always wanted to surpass his brother, he didn't want to rely on his name to intimidate others. Though, even mentioning him might not scare Cain. Humph. In the end, Xander didn't say anything, letting out a grunt as he turned to leave. If he stayed any longer, he feared he wouldn't be able to hold back. He wasn't even sure he could beat Cain now. As Xander left, his subordinates quickly followed, as if they feared Cain would devour them if they stayed. After Xander departed, another group of people approached Cain. The leader was Saurus, who had placed 5th in the test, the same young man with a bright smile. Cain frowned when he saw Saurus approaching. Compared to hypocrites like him, Cain preferred people like Xander who were openly hostile. Saurus approached with a big smile. "Ha, ha! Cain, you're amazing! You took first place and surprised everyone." As he spoke, Saurus tried to give Cain a pat on the shoulder. Cain took a step back, avoiding the contact. Saurus was momentarily surprised but quickly recovered his composure, smiling again, though his eyes couldn't hide a flash of coldness. Cain, with an ironic smile in his mind, asked, "What do you want?" "Ha, ha!" Saurus laughed, masking his discomfort. "It's nothing important, I just wanted to ask if you'd be interested in joining a mission I just accepted. The reward's good, but I think it'd be hard to complete alone. What do you say? We could split the points." "A mission?" Cain's heart skipped a little. Missions are the best source of points for participants. But why seek him out? Cain smiled inwardly, seeing through Saurus' low attempts to recruit him into his team. "I'm not interested." Cain turned away without looking back, leaving Saurus talking to himself. Saurus was momentarily frozen, the smile fading from his face, though he quickly regained his composure. "If Cain's not interested, we'll handle it ourselves. In the end, we have to rely on ourselves," Saurus said to his subordinates. His followers regretted not being able to recruit Cain, but they had even more faith in their leader. After all, Saurus was the one doing the work and allowing them to share the points. Chapter 32, Umbra. When Cain turned around to leave, he took a quick glance at Saurus coughing. Pokémon, coughing, dark yellow. Gender, male. Level, 17. Type, poison. Ability, levitate. Held item, none. Egg moves, stockpile. Basic moves, poison gas, tackle, smog, smokescreen, assurance, clear smog. Learned moves, haze. Trademark moves, none. It was a coughing with decent strength. Although its potential was somewhat low, its level was relatively high. Based on its training status, it also seemed well developed. "He definitely has some skill," Cain murmured. "A person as cunning as him could manage well, as long as he wasn't caught." Cain returned to the exchange center. Since the tests had just been carried out, there weren't many people there yet. As soon as Cain entered, the employee who had helped him swap moves the day before recognized him immediately. They exchanged a brief glance, and upon seeing Cain's inquisitive look, the employee nodded silently, indicating for him to lead Cain to the mysterious person. With a simple look, the employee quickly led Cain toward a secret door. To be honest, he was more anxious than Cain. He knew that person had returned, and since Cain had taken his time arriving, the employee was feeling uneasy. Once Cain showed up, he could breathe a bit easier. He looked around to make sure no one was paying attention, then used his knuckles to knock on the secret door in a specific rhythm. Crack! With a soft click, the secret door opened. He motioned for Cain to enter quickly. When Cain stepped through the door, he saw a long hallway. The dim candlelight provided a faint glow, barely enough to see the way ahead. Accompanied by Murkrow, Cain silently walked down the hall for a few minutes until they finally arrived at a spacious room. Half of the room's space was taken up by bookshelves filled with books. Cain estimated there were more than 10,000 volumes. He couldn't help but be silently surprised. Gathering so many books in a place like Judgment Island wasn't easy. In the center of the room was a desk with a lamp. A mysterious man in a black robe sat there, reading intently. He didn't seem to notice Cain's arrival. Cain wasn't naive enough to think the man wasn't aware of his presence. He motioned for Murkrow to perch on the ground and respectfully approached the desk, waiting for the mysterious man to finish reading. Noticing Cain's action, the corner of the man's lips under the black robe curled slightly, but he quickly refocused on the book. Time passed swiftly, and just when Murkrow was starting to lose patience, the mysterious man slowly lifted his head. He looked at Cain and Murkrow, and spoke in a hoarse, slow voice, "Go fetch me something. When you return, I'll reward you with 10,000 points." As he spoke, he pulled a map from his robe, placed it on the table, and slowly pushed it toward Cain without asking if he accepted the mission. When Cain saw the man's hand, with only 2 fingers left, his pupils contracted abruptly. Cain recognized that wound immediately. It was the result of poison damage. The fact that someone as strong as this mysterious man, who must have been at least an elite-level trainer, had suffered such damage and been forced to amputate his poisoned fingers, was proof of how powerful his opponent must have been. Cain quickly hid his surprise and took the map the man handed him, examining it closely. He couldn't deny that, compared to the crude treasure maps made by Team Rocket, this map was of extreme precision. Every feature of the path, every detail, was drawn meticulously. Without making the man wait long, Cain nodded, stowed the map in his storage belt, and said, "Yes, sir." The mysterious man gave a barely perceptible nod and waved his hand to indicate that Cain could leave. Without hesitation, Cain prepared to depart along with Murkrow. Suddenly, the man, with his head bowed, murmured, "My name is Umbra." Hearing this, Cain halted his steps and replied respectfully, "Yes, Sir Umbra." Seeing that Umbra gave no further instructions, Cain and Murkrow slowly left the mysterious room. When they stepped through the secret door, the bright light disoriented them a bit. After spending so much time in the dark, their eyes didn't adjust well to the sudden change in light. Cain closed his eyes to adjust, while Murkrow covered his with his wings, creating a humorous image. "Umbra." As he walked out, Cain murmured, making sure no one was paying attention before leaving the exchange center. He recalled a rumor from his previous life that circulated within Team Rocket. The 2 sub-leaders of the Shadow Unit were called Umbra and Tenebris. It was said that Giovanni had taken them in as orphans and given them those names. Though traces proving the existence of the sub-leaders Umbra and Tenebris could be found, no one, except Giovanni, had ever seen the leader of the group. It was even rumored that the leader's position was vacant because no one had met Giovanni's standards. Cain shook his head slightly. Those matters were far beyond his reach. It was better to focus on how to complete the Shadow Unit's trial mission. Even though Umbra believed Cain didn't understand the significance of the badge, Cain had hidden it well, but that didn't mean he was truly unaware. Cain had no objections to joining the Shadow Unit. Although they would face greater dangers, the opportunities and resources would be proportional, which aligned with his initial intentions. However, would the Shadow Unit's trial be that simple? Cain gave a wry smile. This is just the beginning, he thought. He prepared all the necessary supplies for the expedition. Honestly, Cain was already feeling that the 1 square meter storage space wasn't enough. He filled it with all kinds of medicine and food. He donned the white Team Rocket uniform, put on the exclusive belt, and fully transformed into a Team Rocket member. Cain and Murkrow's departure didn't attract attention. Following the route marked on the map Umbra had given him, they ventured into the forest. Judgment Island belonged to a semi-developed forest area. As one of Team Rocket's important resources, the island hadn't been overly exploited for its resources. With a slow but steady policy, the forest was well preserved. The trees in the forest were tall and lush, so much so that the dense leaves blocked the sun, leaving only spots of light on the ground. Because of this, the light in the forest wasn't very good, and when occasional clouds blocked the sun, the forest seemed a bit dark. Due to the favorable environment, there were also many Pokémon in the forest. Over time, they had left paths in the forest. If you could find one that took you in the right direction, traveling through the forest would be much easier. As they moved forward, Pokémon appeared more frequently. Grass-type Pokémon, hidden in the grass, camouflaged themselves when they saw Cain and Murkrow. Weedle and Caterpie could be seen scattered around, slowly moving along the trees or diligently eating leaves, waiting to evolve. Sometimes, Spinarak and Ladybug could also be spotted. There were also Pidgey and Spearow hidden in the treetops, hunting bug Pokémon in a struggle for survival. Of course, besides Pokémon, there were also many wild animals that frequently appeared before Cain. Cain was always alert to his surroundings, and the system was activated, scanning every Pokémon that entered his range. Even those well-camouflaged grass-type Pokémon were detected, and their data was stored in the system. Since they were still in the outer part of the forest, the Pokémon that appeared weren't very strong, so Cain didn't pay much attention to them. The objective for Cain wasn't clear on the map, so he had to rely on his intuition to navigate. The day slowly passed as Cain and Murkrow moved forward without encountering any significant danger. Cain stopped by a stream to let Murkrow drink some water. The sound of the running water had a calming effect, allowing Cain to reflect on the situation he was in. Aware that the trial wouldn't be easy, he decided to stay alert. In the sky, the sun was beginning to set, casting the forest into growing twilight. We need to move faster, Cain thought, determined to find a safe place to camp before total darkness fell upon them. With the fading light, Cain and Murkrow resumed their march, venturing deeper into the mysterious and dangerous forest. Chapter 33, Revenge. The night didn't bring many surprises. With the sound of insects and the whisper of leaves, Cain and Murkrow fell into a deep sleep in the tent. Time passes unnoticed while one sleeps, and when Cain opened his eyes again, the sun was already peeking over the horizon with a reddish glow. Lighting the fire, cooking, training, it all followed the same routine as every morning. Cain trained his body, while Murkrow practiced its moves. Both firmly believed that consistency in training always brought rewards. It's said, the year's planning depends on spring, and a day's planning depends on the morning, so morning training always yields better results. Murkrow had recently learned 4 new moves thanks to the GMS obtained: Dark Pulse, Protect, Substitute, and Screech. Learning 4 moves at once required good training and mastery. Except for Protect, which couldn't be trained in the usual way, the other 3 moves needed constant practice to be used effectively in battle. Especially Protect and Substitute, essential for survival in the wild. And as Murkrow's main Dark-type move, Dark Pulse also required training. In reality, these 4 moves were crucial since each could be decisive in specific situations. In addition to these moves, the recently learned Wing Attack from leveling up also needed practice. However, due to the weight Murkrow always carried, it constantly trained the strength of its wings, naturally improving the power of Wing Attack. Murkrow, use Dark Pulse on that tree. Cain ordered. After finishing his physical training, he began helping Murkrow with its specific training. Murkrow nodded upon hearing Cain's command and unleashed Dark Pulse on a tree of medium thickness. Suddenly, a wave of sinister energy, filled with extreme malice, gathered around Murkrow and shot toward the tree. The small forest in front of Murkrow began to tremble, and a whisper of leaves could be heard where Dark Pulse impacted. On the tree, a few black marks appeared. As the move ended, a soft hiss emerged from the marks, an additional effect of the dark type. Did you see the damage you caused with Dark Pulse? With that power, you could hardly do much harm to an enemy. You've barely scraped some bark off this tree. Probably, it would only cause significant damage to Psychic-type Pokémon. But don't worry, you just learned this move. If you train properly and control the dispersion range, you'll be able to concentrate the energy and increase its power. Then, some powerful Psychic and Ghost-type Pokémon will fall to your move. Cain explained to Murkrow the points to improve on with the move. Murkrow quickly nodded upon hearing Cain's instructions. As a Dark-type Pokémon, how could it lose to a psychic or ghost type? Though it had just learned the move, Murkrow could feel its great power. It just needed more practice to master the move. With the prospect of mastering a powerful attack, Murkrow became filled with determination. The malice continued to manifest around Murkrow, and Dark-type energy surged again. But this time, Murkrow didn't release the move right away. It began controlling the energy, reducing its dispersion, trying to focus it to maximize damage. After a moment, when Murkrow felt the energy was sufficiently concentrated, it launched Dark Pulse at the tree again. Boom! The surrounding trees didn't shake as before, there was only a slight tremor. However, the tree hit directly by the attack now had a black hole the size of a finger, with black smoke rising from it clearly more powerful than the first attempt. Seeing Murkrow's improvement in using Dark Pulse, Cain nodded in satisfaction. There was no doubt Murkrow had an exceptional talent for controlling energy. This kind of talent wasn't reflected in a Pokémon's stats but discovered through consistent training. As long as you control the energy concentration well and avoid unnecessary losses, you'll be able to increase the power of your moves. This time was much stronger than before. However, the concentration speed is still slow, you'll need to work on that. This type of progress comes with continuous practice, and you're doing very well, Murkrow. Cain praised Murkrow for its progress. This kind of monotonous and arduous training requires the trainer to give recognition and praise to encourage the Pokémon to keep trying harder. And indeed, after Cain's praise, Murkrow nodded excitedly and resumed its training with even more enthusiasm. With a slight smile, Cain sincerely approved of Murkrow's effort. Winning the loyalty of such an outstanding Pokémon is an honor for any trainer. After about an hour, Cain and Murkrow resumed their journey. Although their main goal was to find what Umbra had indicated, they couldn't neglect basic training, otherwise, it would be a waste of time and life. Murkrow's somewhat fatigued body quickly regained its energy after consuming some poke blocks, and even its aura seemed to strengthen a little. This is the subtle effect of poke blocks. Energy that would normally take 2 or 3 hours to recover was restored in just a few minutes with the help of poke blocks. Additionally, a fatigued body acts like a dry sponge, quickly absorbing the enormous amount of energy from the poke blocks more than it would normally absorb during recovery. With a steady supply of poke blocks, the difference between Murkrow and other Pokémon will become increasingly apparent. Yesterday, in their search for water, they strayed slightly from the original route, so the task now was to return to the path. As the sun rose higher, the temperature in the forest increased, and the daytime Pokémon began to appear. Under the sun's rays, the forest radiated vibrant energy. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the strength of the Pokémon they encountered also increased. However, the number of Pokémon decreased compared to before, as higher-level Pokémon began establishing their own territories. Occasionally, injured Pokémon were seen along the path or in the trees, or even the bodies of Pokémon. Cain and Murkrow ignored these signs. But as they ventured further, their alertness grew. Murkrow carefully watched its surroundings, ready to act at any moment. Fortunately, thanks to the system's ever-active scan feature, no Pokémon could approach Cain undetected. That's how Cain noticed several Pokémon approaching them with intent, having followed them for quite a while. As they neared, just as Cain suddenly stopped, a pincer burst from the bushes, quickly aiming for the weak Cain. Squawk! Murkrow, who had been on alert, reacted instantly when pincer appeared, and with the help of Tailwind, used feint attack to knock down the pincer attempting to strike Cain. Seeing the pincer's failed attack, Cain couldn't help but laugh. This pincer was the same one Murkrow had defeated before. But this time, pincer had learned and decided to attack Cain first. Unfortunately, it underestimated the situation. Even without Murkrow's presence, the system had already detected the danger, and the moment Cain stopped, his body was ready to dodge. Squawk! However, this time pincer wasn't alone. Hearing its cry, 3 more pincer jumped from the bushes, and according to the system's data, they were as strong as the first. Cain smiled and said, "They have no idea the danger they're in. They came together just to be taken down together." A few days ago, Murkrow could already easily take on pincer, and now, with its improved strength, facing 4 pincer was nothing more than a simple exercise. Squawk! 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 The 4 pincer exchanged glances, and with considerable coordination, rushed toward Cain, aware that this seemingly defenseless being was now their greatest threat. Murkrow, use Screech! Cain, unperturbed, calmly ordered. Chapter 34, Wounds. Craw. A sharp sound came from Murkrow's mouth, so piercing that anyone would want to cover their ears, especially the 4 pincer standing in front of him. They had never heard such a horrible sound, and the dreadful vibration seemed to pierce their minds through their ears. Their bodies trembled involuntarily, and they even felt their tough armor loosen. Murkrow, try to show the results of your training. Cain smiled, pulling a remote control from his belt and pressing a button. It was Murkrow's weight controller. As soon as Cain deactivated the weight, Murkrow felt his body lighten completely. With the advantage of the tailwind movement, in the blink of an eye, he closed the distance between him and the pincer. Craw! Craw! Murkrow had never felt so fast. Without the weight restricting him, his body moved like the wind, and he let out a cry of excitement. He hadn't imagined that in just a few days, his speed could improve so much. Seeing Murkrow's unleashed speed, Cain's smile became more evident, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. For a Murkrow this fast, the pincer in front of him were nothing more than a group of insignificant opponents. Murkrow, stop playing. Use Gust to block the 2 pincer in front, then take out the other 2 with wing attack. Cain gave a series of instructions, and Murkrow nodded before flapping his wings forcefully. Without the weight, the Gust movement was unleashed even faster and with greater power. In an instant, 2 white tornadoes of flying energy formed, blocking the 2 pincer charging toward him. Without hesitation, Murkrow turned and charged at the other 2 pincer. As he flew, flying-type energy accumulated in his wings. In an instant, he appeared in front of the 2 pincer, and his wings struck the pincer on the left with force, sending it crashing into a nearby tree, where it fell to the ground motionless, unable to continue fighting. A total defeat in a single blow. After the defense reduction caused by the Screech move, and with Murkrow's full strength unleashed after removing the weight, plus the double damage flying-type moves inflict on bug-type Pokémon, the pincer was instantly defeated. Seeing his companion fall, the remaining pincer roared in anger and launched a direct attack at Murkrow with his large horn, using the takedown move. Murkrow, use Protect, then attack again with wing attack to finish him off. Following Cain's order, Murkrow immediately activated the mysterious energy stored in his body, enveloping himself in a green energy shield. Under the mystical glow of the barrier, Murkrow appeared to be wrapped in a halo of mystery. The barrier shattered under Pincer's attack, but it had already fulfilled its purpose, neutralizing the enemy's offense. While Pincer stared in disbelief at his failed attack, Murkrow's wings, charged with flying-type energy, struck him mercilessly. With the sound of Pincer's shell cracking, the Pokémon was sent crashing to the ground, following the same fate as his companion. At that moment, the 2 pincer who had been blocked by the Gust move finally managed to break free, their armor marked by damage. Realizing that their initial advantage of 4 against 1 had turned into a 2-on-1 battle, the pincer leading the attack was left bewildered. He barely understood how Murkrow, who hadn't been that strong before, had managed to change the situation so drastically. Murkrow, use Gust again, then attack with wing attack and finish them off. Although the pincer were confused, Murkrow was not. He had been eagerly awaiting this moment of unrestricted combat, and he wasn't going to waste the opportunity. With a war cry, 2 tornadoes surged once more, trapping the pincer inside. Without hesitation, Murkrow dove into the tornado. Under the white glow of his wings, boom, boom. 2 figures flew out of the whirlwind, and even the tornadoes dissipated instantly. Craw! Murkrow cried out loudly, not bothering to look at the 2 fallen pincer. There was no need to check, both had lost the ability to fight the moment they were thrown into the air. It was the first time since following Cain that Murkrow had enjoyed such a satisfying battle. Cain gently stroked Murkrow's proud head and jokingly said, "This is just the result of short-term training, don't get too confident. Keep working hard." Although Cain was quite pleased with Murkrow's strength, he didn't want him to become arrogant, so he gave a small warning. Craw, craw. Murkrow quickly protested, assuring that he wasn't being arrogant, just a little excited. Hehe, you did very well this time. Cain smiled and shook his head. He didn't mean it seriously, he was just teasing. Now do you see the results of your training? Cain continued, but his tone was full of humor that he wasn't trying to hide. Murkrow nodded quickly, his small eyes shining with admiration. He was becoming a devoted little follower of Cain. You. Cain gave him a gentle tap on the head with his finger and raised the remote control, waving it in front of Murkrow. I'm going to reactivate the weight, are you ready? Murkrow was a little surprised. He had just started enjoying the feeling of freedom, and now he was about to be restricted again. But he understood the reasoning behind Cain's actions and, though reluctantly, nodded to show his agreement. Cain noticed Murkrow's disappointment, but he knew it still wasn't the time to leave him unrestricted. Murkrow still needed to improve his strength. With Murkrow's eyes filled with expectation, Cain reactivated the weight, keeping it at the previous 5 kilograms. Murkrow immediately felt the weight on his body, causing his flying height to drop a bit, but he quickly adapted and returned to the same altitude as before, looking at Cain at eye level. He was already used to that weight, and with a small adjustment, he could move normally. While Cain performed an automatic scan with his system, he was surprised to discover that Murkrow's level had risen again after the recent battle. This level increase was so natural that even Murkrow probably didn't realize it, attributing it instead to the relief of the weight. Cain didn't mention it and let Murkrow think that the advancement was due to the weight training, so he would continue to train enthusiastically. One of the advantages of fighting in the wild is that, after a battle, there's no need to clean up the field. Due to the sounds of the recent fight, the forest was completely silent. Taking advantage of the absence of other Pokémon, Cain and Murkrow left the area and returned to their marked path on the map. The earlier fight had been just a small distraction for them, but the only significant outcome was that Murkrow leveled up again. Following the map's route and constantly comparing the surroundings with landmarks, Cain made sure not to stray too far from the path. Almost 4 hours had passed since the battle with the Pinsir, and Cain had ventured nearly 30 kilometers deeper into the forest. They were now completely outside the forest's periphery, beginning to head toward the center. The trees in the forest were becoming increasingly larger, their trunks thicker, the leaves denser, and the spaces allowing light to pass through were getting smaller. Consequently, the temperature dropped, and a chill began to spread through the forest. Although they still saw traces of Pokémon, Weedle and Caterpie were no longer visible, and there were no signs of battles between Pidgey and Spearow. The strength of the Pokémon was increasing, and Murkrow's aura could no longer completely intimidate other Pokémon. As they entered territory after territory, the number of Pokémon daring to follow them increased. Just a moment ago, when Cain was picking berries from a tree, he accidentally entered the territory of a group of powerful Pokémon. A Raticate emerged from the ground and launched a fierce attack. Since the system couldn't scan underground, Cain wasn't prepared for the Raticate's attack. However, his reflexes, honed over the years, allowed him to dodge the attack, but even so, he received a scratch on his arm. It was a level 20 Raticate, and its claws, used to digging, left a deep wound on Cain's arm. Had he not dodged in time, his entire arm could have been rendered useless. Seeing Cain injured, Murkrow became enraged and attacked with all his might, launching a barrage of moves at Raticate. Under the torrential attack, Raticate was left stunned by Murkrow's skill, having thought he had found easy prey, only to realize he had run into a wall of iron. After easily defeating a level 20 Raticate, Murkrow wasn't happy at all, as Cain had been hurt. Fortunately, Cain had brought enough medical supplies. Enduring the pain, he washed the wound with water, disinfected it with a spray, and then covered it with a bandage. The entire process was smooth, and he didn't make a sound during the disinfection. From his past life, Cain had developed excellent wound treatment skills, and he was already accustomed to this type of injury. Humans are too vulnerable against Pokémon, any mistake can be fatal. Additionally, one cannot rely too much on the system, as its scan range is limited and cannot provide timely feedback for long-range or fast-moving Pokémon, let alone those underground. Thinking that by defeating Raticate the problem was solved, Cain soon realized he had stirred up a hornet's nest. One Raticate after another began emerging from the ground, baring their teeth and attacking Murkrow, determined to avenge their companion. While it seemed Murkrow was strong, there were many of them, and they were determined not to let him go. Chapter 35, Slowpoke. Murkrow, already burning with fury, showed no mercy. It defeated one after another under Cain's precise orders, making the Raticate fall one by one. However, as time went on, the speed at which the Raticate appeared increased. Realizing something was wrong, Cain quickly stopped Murkrow, who kept attacking. This place was clearly a Raticate nest, and if they didn't retreat now, soon they wouldn't be able to. Facing so many Raticate, Cain decided to avoid further confrontation for now, and both he and his Pokémon began to flee. A group of Raticate, with an average level of 20, along with some small Rattata, relentlessly chased after Cain. Curiously, the small Rattata, about the size of puppies, were the most persistent, although the dense bushes on the ground slowed their advance. Noticing this, Cain ran toward areas with more vegetation. With his Team Rocket uniform, he could minimize the damage caused by the thorns in the bushes. While Cain was busy running, Murkrow didn't worry in the least, as the Raticate couldn't catch up. From time to time, he launched moves like Gust and Dark Pulse. The Raticate became perfect targets for Murkrow to train his moves. Finally, the Raticate that were chasing them realized they couldn't catch Cain, and their numbers quickly dwindled under Murkrow's furious attacks. The Raticate, abandoning the pursuit, angrily burrowed underground to avoid further attacks from Murkrow. Uf. Cain stopped running, resting his hands on his knees, breathing heavily as if he were a bellows. His chest rose and fell, and his heart pounded so hard it seemed about to burst. My body is still too weak, Cain thought as he gasped. Even though he had been recovering and training his body, running at that speed for so long nearly left him breathless. With the frantic pace of his breathing, blood started seeping through the freshly applied bandage on his arm, and the sweat dripping onto the wound caused a sharp pain that stimulated his nerves to the limit. Now that he could finally look around, Cain realized he had seriously deviated from the original path in his attempt to escape the Raticate. The first thing he had to do was get back on track. After resting for a bit, Cain began to treat the wound on his hand. Comparing his position with the marks on the map, he realized he was quite far from the path. If he kept moving away, he would soon be in an uncharted area. The clear sound of running water, accompanied by a slight humid breeze, came from the distance. He noticed that nearby there was a small waterfall, which was the furthest point marked on the map. After thinking for a moment, Cain decided to head to the water source to rest. The wound that had reopened was starting to bleed again, and the area around it was becoming pale, an effect of the sweat soaking it. Following the sound of the water, Cain advanced with Murkrow, not forgetting to give his Pokémon some poke blocks, as it had expended a lot of energy. When he passed through a forest and finally reached the waterfall, Cain was surprised by the scene he saw. The waterfall's water flowed continuously, generating a thick mist. The ancient trees surrounding the area were lush, and the sunlight filtering through the leaves created small rainbows in the mist. Noticing Cain and Murkrow's arrival, the Pokémon playing in the water quickly submerged, while the birds searching for food flapped their wings and flew away, leaving the small valley, which had been full of life, in silence. This didn't bother Cain, who kept moving forward in this unexplored valley, letting the refreshing mist touch his face. However, among all the Pokémon, there was one that didn't budge, a Slowpoke lying by the river, its small pink tail submerged in the water, staring blankly ahead. This small pink Pokémon was, indeed, a Slowpoke. Cain looked surprised at the Slowpoke, who showed no fear of him. As he approached, Slowpoke's figure in the mist became clearer. "What is this?" Cain exclaimed as he saw Slowpoke up close. Although Slowpoke's color was still pink, it was a whiter shade than other Slowpoke. A shiny Slowpoke? A gleam passed through Cain's eyes, and the system activated, displaying the data of the Slowpoke in front of him. Pokémon, shiny Slowpoke, green, deteriorating. Gender, male. Level, 20. Type, water and psychic. Ability, own tempo. Held item, none. Egg moves, rest, rain dance, teleport. Basic moves, curse, yawn, tackle, growl, water gun, confusion, disable. Learned moves, calm mind, size hawk. Trademark moves, none. Green quality. And deteriorating. Cain was astonished by Slowpoke's moves. What kind of moves were these? It was like a warehouse of psychic moves. Especially teleport, an extremely useful move in any situation, whether for escaping or pursuing. Any Slowpoke with this move would be far more valuable than a normal one. This indicated that this Slowpoke had exceptional talent in psychic moves. Slowpoke glanced at Cain and Murkrow, showing no reaction. He was used to it. Since he was little, his color had always been different from the other Slowpoke. Although Slowpoke weren't particularly exclusionary Pokémon, there had always been a slight difference in how they interacted with him. Other Pokémon looked at him with curious eyes, as if he were a rare species. But he was just a Slowpoke. Moreover, his personality was completely different from the rest of his group. While Slowpoke were typically lazy and barely moved when an enemy appeared, he was the opposite. If there was an enemy, he was the first to jump into battle. In every fight, he discovered that he truly enjoyed battling. After living with his group for 2 years, his restless nature finally led to his rejection. While all the Slowpoke basked in the sun, he trained. While everyone took naps, he trained. Even when Slowpoke were lost in their thoughts, he kept training. He had become an outcast within his own group. After multiple failed attempts to fit in, he finally decided to leave alone, hoping to change and learn how to be like the other Slowpoke, able to spend an entire day simply meditating and able to return to his group. That's why when Cain and Murkrow approached, he didn't react, as he was trying to imitate how a true Slowpoke should behave. His restless mind prevented him from stopping his thoughts, but now he was almost perfectly imitating a Slowpoke. As funny as it may seem, a Slowpoke was learning to be a real Slowpoke. But to him, that was all that mattered. He wanted to be accepted by his peers. He didn't want to be alone. But Cain knew none of this. What he saw was a Slowpoke with astonishing talent, that, although outwardly no different from the others, was special. Without hesitation, Cain decided to capture it. Murkrow, go ahead. Greet your future teammate. Use Dark Pulse. Cain told Murkrow with a smile. He was determined to capture that Slowpoke. Both because of its green quality and the moves it had, Cain was resolved to act. Caw. Murkrow nodded excitedly. He was happy that he would soon have a new companion, but when it came to fighting, he wasn't planning to hold back. If Slowpoke couldn't withstand a single attack, that meant he wasn't fit to be his companion. An intense sinister energy surrounded Murkrow, followed by black tendrils that quickly gathered. After a morning of training, although Murkrow hadn't fully mastered Dark Pulse, his ability had improved significantly. Since Dark-type moves are effective against Psychic-type Pokémon, Slowpoke immediately sensed the sinister energy as he focused. Although it was an energy he detested, his battle experience allowed him to react smoothly. Slowly, his blank expression became serious, and his large eyes began to glow with determination. Hey! Cain couldn't help but exclaim as he saw the change in Slowpoke. Without a doubt, this Slowpoke was special. But now wasn't the time to be distracted. Murkrow had already gathered all the necessary dark energy, and Dark Pulse was ready to be unleashed, with Slowpoke as the target. Slowpoke, showing no signs of panic, stood firm. Even though he detested Dark-type energy, his vast battle experience allowed him to stay calm. He slightly opened his mouth, and a jet of water shot out like a bullet, fast and precise. The water pierced through the Dark Pulse, heading directly for Murkrow. Bang! The Dark Pulse hit Slowpoke hard, and the Dark-type damage caused him to cry out in pain. But in his eyes, a fighting spirit and ferocity began to emerge. He had repressed his true nature for a long time, trying to imitate the other Slowpoke, but Murkrow's attack had awakened it. Bang! The water gun also struck Murkrow, who had been too focused on launching the Dark Pulse and hadn't expected Slowpoke to counterattack without trying to dodge. Slowpoke had chosen a direct exchange of blows. Chapter 36, Capture. Cain once again removed the remote control of Murkrow's additional weight. Facing a level 20 Slowpoke with the same green quality, Murkrow couldn't afford to be restricted in the slightest. Freed again, Murkrow wasn't as excited as at the beginning. Against this Slowpoke, it felt the pressure. However, despite Slowpoke's strength, its specialty was Psychic-type moves. But for a Dark-type Pokémon like Murkrow, what were Psychic moves? They had no effect. Therefore, Slowpoke was at a disadvantage from the start. Even so, Slowpoke showed no intention of giving up. On the contrary, it became braver and more excited as the battle progressed. Even with the simple water gun move, it executed it masterfully. Thanks to its level advantage and excellent physical condition, it held its ground firmly in the battle against Murkrow. After another confrontation, Murkrow was panting, and Slowpoke lay on the ground, not as active as before. However, its eyes shone brightly, reflecting emotions of excitement, satisfaction, and happiness. During the battle, although Cain constantly directed Murkrow, he also paid attention to the changes in Slowpoke. He gradually learned about this Slowpoke. The reason this Slowpoke was alone here was likely not just because of its color but also due to its personality. If it weren't for its Slowpoke appearance, Cain might have mistaken it for another water-type Pokémon full of fighting spirit. Murkrow, use Dark Pulse one more time. Let's give this future companion a little rest, Cain said, observing Slowpoke's exhausted state. A Dark Pulse with double damage would be enough to knock it out. Although Murkrow was very tired, it still had the strength to launch a few more moves. With one breath, the dark pulse formed and launched the final attack on Slowpoke. Slowpoke, already exhausted, had lost the ability to resist. Although it had a higher level than Murkrow, being a Pokémon specializing in psychic moves it couldn't use, its disadvantage was evident from the beginning. Defeat was only a matter of time. It would be great to keep fighting like this. Slowpoke didn't feel much about its defeat, but its obsession with battle made it remember this thought as it lost consciousness. At the moment it fell, a super ball hit it, capturing it inside. The super ball shook on the ground, its red light flashing, indicating Slowpoke's internal struggle. Cain approached the super ball and, watching it shake, couldn't help but say, "Slowpoke, if you join me, there will be endless battles." As if it had heard Cain's words, the super ball stopped shaking after a few seconds, the red light stopped flashing, and it finally stayed still. Seeing that he had finally captured Slowpoke, Cain quickly picked up the super ball from the ground and, under Murkrow's eager gaze, released it. When the Pokeball opened, a red flash appeared, and a small pale pink Pokémon appeared on the ground. The Slowpoke, previously unconscious, had now regained consciousness. Although its body was still injured and it couldn't move, its eyes were open. Cain gently lifted Slowpoke and sat on the damp ground, placing it on his lap. Seeing Slowpoke's hesitant and frightened gaze, Cain softly said, "Don't be afraid, Slowpoke, from now on, we are companions. This is Murkrow, and although you fought earlier, you must get along from now on." Caw. Caw. Murkrow nodded quickly, it didn't want a newly joined companion to hold a grudge against it. Surprisingly, Slowpoke didn't hold any resentment towards Murkrow. In fact, it somewhat liked it for having provided such an enjoyable fight, as could be read in its big eyes. "Yaden," it said weakly, indicating that it didn't mind. Hearing Slowpoke's sound, Murkrow visibly sighed in relief and began flying around Slowpoke, curiously observing it, trying to understand this new and powerful companion better. Cain also understood their interaction and, smiling, took out a healing spray from his belt. Under Slowpoke's faint groans, he sprayed it over all its wounds. The scars caused by the dark energy faded a little. "Yaden," Slowpoke murmured after all the spray had been used, looking at Cain with a mix of curiosity and longing in its eyes, which, along with its shy expression, contrasted with the stubbornness and madness it showed during the battle. "Slowpoke, we are companions now. I'm counting on you in the future," Cain said with a smile, taking a light yellow poke block from his belt, the same one Murkrow had used before to recover some of its depleted potential. "Yaden." Slowpoke immediately swallowed the poke block Cain gave it, its white eyes growing even larger, showing an expression of great satisfaction as it made a delighted sound. After a few seconds, Slowpoke came to its senses, but it noticed a different feeling in its body. Since it left its group, it had been trying to imitate a normal Slowpoke, but it always felt that something wasn't right, as if it could only use 80% of its strength. But after eating this poke block, it felt that now it could use 90% of its strength. Although it wasn't at its best yet, it was surprised by the improvement. "I see you like poke blocks, Slowpoke. You don't have to imitate other Slowpoke, just be yourself." Cain had guessed that Slowpoke's loss of potential was due to it no longer being itself, trying to mimic others. "Yaden Yaden." Slowpoke looked at Cain, noticing there was no disdain or rejection in his eyes. Although Slowpoke wasn't good at expressing itself, it could feel the kindness emanating from Cain and his lack of concern for the differences between it and other Slowpoke. Finally, Slowpoke began to lower its guard and show its true self. Although it still looked like a Slowpoke, its gaze became sharper, and its large eyes were no longer as vacant. Like windows to the soul, they reflected its desire to fight, a desire it no longer repressed. Cain smiled. Only when Slowpoke freed itself to truly be itself could it be the real Slowpoke. What did it matter if it was different from the others? Time would prove what was right. Indeed, using poke blocks and rediscovering its true self had reversed Slowpoke's loss of potential. During the next period, Slowpoke would need to continue using poke blocks. The supplies Murkrow had left weren't enough for it, so Cain would have to make more. Additionally, Slowpoke's wounds needed more treatment. Although the healing spray helped, it wouldn't recover immediately. For Slowpoke's future growth, Cain would also have to create some specific poke blocks for it. Although there were few recipes for poke blocks combining water and psychic types in the system's database, some did exist. "Slowpoke, can you walk? Let's find a place to rest." This place was too damp to camp, but it was a good point to refill their water supply. "Slowpoke, which was 1.2 meters tall and weighed almost 40 kilograms, wasn't something Cain could easily lift. Yadin Slowpoke nodded but didn't move. Instead, its eyes emitted a soft blue glow, enveloping itself in psychic energy. Cain felt the weight on his body begin to lessen until there was none at all. Slowpoke had lifted itself about 10 centimeters off the ground. Seeing Slowpoke's psychic ability, Cain's eyes lit up. With such strong psychic power and fine control, it seemed he had found a real treasure. Unless it faced a dark-type Pokémon, with Slowpoke's psychic power at that moment, it would probably be unstoppable against any opponent of a similar level. With Slowpoke floating and Murkrow flying in the air, Cain left the mist-filled valley and searched for a relatively dry and flat spot. After a long time searching for dry wood, he finally lit a fire. Just in time for lunch, Cain began preparing food. Since Slowpoke was injured and needed to recover its potential with poke blocks, Cain ordered Murkrow to go find food by itself. Murkrow had great survival skills and could find food on its own. Cain didn't need to worry about it. Then he turned toward Slowpoke, who was lying on a dry rock. With the help of Murkrow and Cain, Slowpoke's external wounds had healed, but the fatigue from the battle still left it a bit exhausted. "Just rest, Slowpoke," Cain said, gently stroking Slowpoke's head, remembering that it was also a water-type Pokémon and probably wasn't used to being on land. Yadin Slowpoke seemed to enjoy Cain's care, and with half-closed eyes, it soon fell asleep. "What a sincere Pokémon!" Cain laughed and, to not disturb its rest, lowered his voice and began preparing poke blocks for Slowpoke. Chapter 37, A Busy Afternoon. It might sound strange, but Cain's two Pokémon currently have flaws in their potential and need to be adjusted through poke blocks. However, as a trainer, a Pokémon's potential is not the most important thing. What matters most is their attitude towards battles and training. As they say, diligence can make up for a lack of talent, and there's some truth to that. Of course, this doesn't mean that a Pokémon with green potential has no desire to fight, while one with red potential does, or that a Pokémon with red potential can always defeat one with green potential. Under normal conditions, that wouldn't be possible. A famous person once said that success is 1% talent and 99% effort, but this only applies when the potential is similar. If there's a huge difference in talent, that 1% can become a chasm, the greatest enemy on the path to success. So, when Cain discovered that Slowpoke had green quality and loved to battle, he knew he had found a treasure. Moreover, its outstanding psychic ability was so impressive that Cain wouldn't trade it even for a blue quality Pokémon. Murkrow's level also increased by 1 after the day's battle, reaching level 17, which shows rapid progress. With a level 17 Murkrow and a level 20 Slowpoke, Cain now has the confidence to explore the entire forest. Moreover, with Slowpoke's teleport move, they'll always be in a safe position, even when facing strong opponents. The scent of roasted fish filled the air from the campfire. It had never smelled so delicious, and Slowpoke, amazed, stared at the roasted fish as its mouth began to water. Although it had grown tired of fish, the touch of its trainer and a bit of seasoning made it irresistible, causing its salivary glands to work overtime. "Caw, caw." Murkrow, seeing Slowpoke's expression, approached and patted its head with its wings, displaying pride in its trainer. "Yadin Yadin," Slowpoke responded as if asking what that delicious thing was and when it could eat it. "Caw." Murkrow was puzzled by Slowpoke's question, as all it knew was how to eat and didn't know when the roasted fish would be ready. Cain watched his two Pokémon exchange friendly words and couldn't help but smile. Though he didn't understand what they were saying, he knew the aim of their conversation. With both of them staring hopefully, Cain took the roasted fish from the fire and placed it in a bowl, serving them 3 pieces each. As soon as Murkrow saw its food, it began devouring it, completely ignoring the bones, as its strong digestive system made the bones a joke for it. Yadin Slowpoke looked at the food in front of it, swallowed its saliva, and looked at Cain, as if asking, "Is this for me?" Cain patted Slowpoke's soft pink head and nodded with a smile. "Yes, it's for you. Enjoy." Since it was born, Slowpoke had never tasted anything so delicious or received such kindness. As it ate, its big eyes began to fill with tears. Slowpoke ate so fast that it even finished before Murkrow, quickly devouring its 3 pieces of roasted fish. Happy, Slowpoke let out a small burp while Murkrow finished eating at a slightly slower pace. "Well, we've eaten and had enough to drink. Murkrow, let's start training." "Slowpoke, you can rest and recover." Since Cain had decided to stay and rest during the day, he didn't want to waste time. Murkrow's use of dark-type moves was still in its early stages, and improving its skill required constant practice. On the other hand, Slowpoke had just been captured, and it wasn't the right time to subject it to intense training, even if it wanted to. It needed to recover not just its body but also its potential, which would determine its future growth. However, once its body fully recovers, it will be able to join the training, as only then will the poke blocks help it maximize its potential. Yaden Slowpoke looked enviously at Murkrow, who was training hard. Although it didn't care much about losing today, it knew it had been defeated. It attributed the loss to Murkrow's effort, as it had been neglecting its training. But even though it wanted to join, Cain wouldn't allow it, and Slowpoke knew its body wasn't in the right condition, training would only make things worse. Cain noticed Slowpoke's expression and patted its head with a smile, saying, "Don't rush. First, recover. If you have nothing else to do, use your psychic power to lift that rock." He pointed to a human-sized rock. In the previous battle, when Slowpoke discovered that its psychic moves didn't work against Murkrow, it stopped using them. Therefore, although it was injured, its psychic energy was still abundant, and training its telekinesis wouldn't affect it. Hearing Cain, Slowpoke realized that even though it hadn't often trained its psychic abilities, this was still a form of training. Its big eyes began to glow blue, and the distant rock seemed to be wrapped in magical energy, slowly rising. If Cain knew that a Slowpoke with such strong psychic abilities had never trained its powers, he would have been surprised. While Murkrow and Slowpoke entered their training state, Cain was able to enjoy his lunch in peace. A peaceful, yet busy afternoon for Cain and his Pokémon. Murkrow and Slowpoke were absorbed in their training while Cain began preparing a new type of Poke Block for Slowpoke, which it would use in the future. Once the yellow berry Poke Blocks are finished, it will be time to start with water and psychic type specialized Poke Blocks. The illusory blue Poke Block is the ideal option Cain has chosen for Slowpoke, as it effectively enhances the absorption of psychic and water energy. It has a sweet taste and is a transparent, light blue Poke Block. One can't help but mention the crafting of Poke Blocks. Why, if everything has advanced, are Poke Block making tools still made of wood? Is it because Team Rocket's base lacks specialized tools? Of course not. It's because those tools are too obvious and have no other purpose besides making Poke Blocks. If Cain bought those specialized tools, it would raise suspicion. Even if no one asked him directly, it would cause unnecessary trouble. How would an orphan who had never had contact with Pokémon explain that they knew how to make Poke Blocks? So, even though the process is slower, as long as the quality is satisfactory, it's not that important. Moreover, in the Team Rocket base on this test island, there are no tools for making advanced Poke Blocks. With the help of the system, Cain cut, crushed, ground, mixed, and separated all the materials for the Poke Blocks with precision. Every step was smooth, with no pauses. After completing each step, the system indicated what to do next, so within just 2 hours, Cain finished making the Poke Blocks that Slowpoke would need for the next few weeks. Looking at the containers filled with pure energy, all that was left was to wait for them to solidify and become valuable intermediate-level Poke Blocks. During those 2 hours, Murkrow and Slowpoke didn't stop training. Although Cain was busy making Poke Blocks, he dedicated part of his attention to his Pokémon, offering them guidance in their training so they wouldn't stray from the right path. In his past life, Cain had reached the level of a quasi-elite trainer, and although he had never trained a Slowpoke, he had enough experience to identify weaknesses in Pokémon at that level, especially in Murkrow, his starter Pokémon in his past life. Although he eventually decided not to continue with Murkrow, the effort he put into it cannot be denied. As for Slowpoke, being a water and psychic type Pokémon, Cain also had knowledge of how to train its underdeveloped psychic abilities. With its outstanding psychic talent, Slowpoke wouldn't find it difficult to follow Cain's directions. Once its body fully recovers, Cain will feel more confident in his mission. As they delve deeper into the forest, the level of the Pokémon will surely increase. Aside from necessary battles, Cain will avoid encounters with high-level Pokémon as much as possible. And if they come across one, Slowpoke's teleport move will allow them to escape quickly. After 2 hours, Slowpoke had also gradually regained its energy. After training its psychic abilities for an extended period, and with Cain's guidance, Slowpoke also began training its body and water-type moves. Chapter 38, Revealing Storm. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, the sky roared with a rumble, and lightning tore through the firmament in an instant, quickly disappearing into the increasingly dark clouds. The sky, which had originally been a clear blue, began to fill with black clouds that covered the sun. These clouds, accompanied by lightning and thunder, expanded rapidly, eventually dominating the entire sky. Sensing the change in the sky and being especially sensitive to moisture, Slowpoke approached Cain, tugging at his pants with his small pink hand, saying, "Yaden, Yaden," while pointing toward the sky. He was telling Cain that rain was coming, and it wasn't going to be just a drizzle, but a torrential downpour. "I know, we need to find a place to take shelter from the rain," Cain said, also noticing the change in the sky. After all, the thunder wasn't for nothing. However, this sudden storm took Cain by surprise. Hearing that Cain wanted to find shelter, Slowpoke rolled his eyes, suddenly remembering a place. He tugged at Cain's pants again, saying, "Yaden, Yaden." "Oh? You're saying you know where we can take shelter?" Cain, observing Slowpoke's actions, quickly understood his intent. Looking into Slowpoke's eyes, Cain could always understand what he wanted to convey. Perhaps this was one of the peculiarities of psychic-type Pokémon. "Murkrow, let's go, we'll follow Slowpoke to find shelter," Cain signaled for Murkrow to stop training. The wounds on Slowpoke's body had mostly healed. With a blue glow in his eyes, he used his telekinesis to lift himself slightly into the air. Although he normally never used his psychic powers to levitate, inspired by Cain, Slowpoke began to lift his body to move more quickly. Leading Cain and Murkrow, Slowpoke returned to the waterfall. Due to the impending rain, the air became denser, and the Pokémon in the water, suffering from a lack of oxygen, began to surface. Magikarp, Poliwag, Poliwhirl, Goldeen, Seeking, Wooper, Marill, and other common Pokémon from the Kanto region surfaced one by one. Although Cain was used to seeing them, his eyes gleamed as the system in his mind quickly analyzed each Pokémon, displaying their data in front of him. Most of the Pokémon had red quality, and a few were orange. Cain looked at them but wasn't interested in capturing or training them. "Yaden, Yaden." Upon reaching the edge of the lake beneath the waterfall, the atmosphere became even more humid. Just by staying for a while, their bodies became noticeably damp. For Murkrow, the humid air was very uncomfortable. His black, shiny feathers became heavy with moisture, making each flap of his wings harder. Moreover, the sensation of sticky feathers gave him the impression of falling into the water. "Gah!" Murkrow flapped his wings in displeasure, trying to shake off the moisture, but it was futile since the air was filled with water. Seeing Murkrow's disgusted expression, Slowpoke hurried up. He headed for the waterfall and pointed towards it, saying, "Yaden. You mean there's a cave behind the waterfall?" Cain asked, intrigued by Slowpoke's action. He had originally thought it was just a regular waterfall, but it turned out there was a cave behind the water curtain. Slowpoke nodded, and his eyes gleamed with an intense blue glow as he increased his telekinesis, creating a gap in the waterfall large enough for a person to pass through. Normally, Slowpoke would have just crawled through, but knowing Cain and Murkrow didn't enjoy getting soaked, he used his psychic power to create a passage for them. Seeing Slowpoke was slightly fatigued, Cain and Murkrow wasted no time and quickly entered the cave behind the waterfall. After they went in, Slowpoke stopped controlling the waterfall and crawled inside under the water pressure, which only slightly pressed down on his body. "You're amazing, Slowpoke, thanks for the effort." Cain praised Slowpoke before continuing deeper into the cave with Murkrow. For Cain, it was customary to explore any unknown cave first. However, considering Slowpoke's situation, it seemed likely this was where he had been living lately. It wasn't unusual for him to crawl out of the water frequently, allowing him to discover this place. Unlike the outside, full of humidity, the inside of the cave became drier the further they went. This could be because the waterfall blocked contact with the outside, preventing moisture from entering. Finally free from the humid environment, Murkrow flew quickly around the cave, drying himself off as he moved. Not long after they entered the cave, it began to pour outside. The roar of the water, combined with the sound of the waterfall, created a symphony of nature in the jungle. As the rain began, the air ceased to be so dense, and the Pokémon in the water became immediately more active, appearing in the lake and on the shores. Cain approached the waterfall and, through the clear water, could see a bit of what was happening outside, though not clearly. Finally, Slowpoke used his telekinesis to form a small hole in the waterfall, allowing Cain to see fully what was happening outside. Cain watched as several Pokémon, usually hidden under the water, surfaced. In addition to the common Magikarp and Goldeen, a few relatively rare Pokémon appeared. What's that? Cain couldn't help but exclaim as he saw the figure of a Pokémon quickly pass by. It can't be. Besides those common Pokémon, she's here too. Before Cain's eyes passed a figure adorned with shining multicolored scales. Her elongated, elegant body had 2 long antennas, and her tail moved like a fan, glimmering under the rain. Melodic. I can't believe the water quality here is so good that there's even a wild Melodic. Melodic, being the evolved form of Phoebus, only evolves when it carries a prism scale. Given how extremely rare the prism scale is, it's very unlikely for a wild Phoebus to obtain one, so finding a wild Melodic is almost impossible. In Cain's mind, at this point, no one in the Pokémon League knew that Phoebus could evolve, much less that its evolution resulted in the beautiful Melodic. To them, Melodic had no pre-evolved form, and they considered Phoebus, which didn't have a known evolution, as a Pokémon even inferior to Magikarp. For a moment, Cain felt a strong temptation to rush out and capture that Melodic, regardless of its quality. After all, a Pokémon that managed to evolve in the wild couldn't be an ordinary Pokémon. However, that temptation was quickly dismissed. It would be madness to go out during a storm to capture a Melodic that was being admired by all the other Pokémon. Additionally, due to the distance, it wasn't clear what level Melodic was, and attacking rashly could mean the end for Cain and all his Pokémon. Shaking his head, Cain abandoned that idea and continued to observe the Pokémon in the water. Besides the surprise of seeing a Melodic, Cain also noticed the presence of some other rare Pokémon. What caught his attention the most was the occasional appearance of Squirtle. There was more than one wild Squirtle here. This was something Cain hadn't expected. And considering how frequently they appeared, it seemed like there was a small group of Squirtle in the area. As one of the water-type starter Pokémon from the Kanto region, Squirtle had always been controlled by the Pokémon League. If the League found out about the existence of a wild Squirtle group, they would quickly take action to ensure they were captured and prevent starter Pokémon from spreading beyond their control. Although there were always some starter Pokémon left in the wild, it was becoming increasingly difficult to find them due to the efforts of the Pokémon League. This place, being controlled by Team Rocket, was outside the League's reach. That's why Cain wasn't surprised to find wild Squirtle here. However, he was excited by the idea of capturing one, as obtaining a water-type starter would be extremely useful in the future. Nevertheless, after thinking for a moment, Cain decided to wait until the storm passed. It wasn't safe to go out during a storm just to capture a Squirtle, especially considering he already had enough on his plate. However, the calm didn't last long. The Pokémon who had been happily playing in the rain under Melodic's guidance were interrupted by the arrival of another Pokémon. Roar! With the thunderous dragon's roar, a large Pokémon appeared in the lake. With the impact of the water and its intimidating presence, all the Pokémon were frightened. A Gyarados surfaced in the lake. Melodic! Seeing Gyarados, Melodic swam toward all the Pokémon and cried out to the enraged Gyarados. However, Gyarados paid no attention to Melodic. Annoyed by his nap being interrupted by the joyful Pokémon, he was extremely angry and needed a fight to vent his fury. Roar! A yellow glow quickly gathered in Gyarados' mouth, followed by a devastating hyper beam. Water currents gathered around Melodic, and swimming at great speed in the water, she moved ahead of all the Pokémon, enduring Gyarados' attack. This cave is such a unique place. If I get the chance in the future, I might consider coming back to capture those Squirtle or even Melodic, Cain murmured, contemplating the vast world of Pokémon and the surprises that still awaited him. With the sky still cloudy, Cain and his Pokémon took shelter in the cave, waiting for the storm to pass, while thinking about their next steps. Chapter 39, The Power of Golduck. Cain didn't have much time to observe, as the battle between Melodic and Gyarados followed the flow of the water, moving further and further away until the noise faded. From a distance, only the beams of Hyper Beam could be seen shooting columns of water across the forest before disappearing completely. Whew! What a terrifying battle! I'm glad I didn't try to capture that Melodic. Judging by the remnants of the fight, both Pokémon are probably over level 40, Cain thought, feeling relieved. With the departure of the two Pokémon, the small frightened Pokémon also hid, and the once bustling lake fell silent. Apart from the constant rain, there were no signs of life. Cain signaled Slowpoke to release his control over the waterfall, then returned deeper into the cave to wait for the rain to stop. I really want to reach that level of combat. That way, I won't have to follow anyone's orders. Influenced by the battle between Gyarados and Melodic, Cain thought to himself, but in this life, I won't abandon them. Looking at Murkrow, who had almost finished drying off, and Slowpoke, who always accompanied him, Cain made a silent promise to them. After half an hour, the rain began to gradually subside, and with Slowpoke's help, Cain slowly exited the cave behind the waterfall. Since the rain had just stopped, the forest was soaked, but at the same time, under the sunlight peeking through the clouds, the place radiated a completely new atmosphere. It was as if everything had come back to life. Walking through the meadow drenched in water droplets, Cain, accompanied by Murkrow and Slowpoke, left the lake area. Originally, he had planned to stay there for a day so Slowpoke could recover and to make some poke blocks, but the rain had interrupted his plans. Fortunately, Slowpoke had recovered well, and the poke blocks were already made, they just needed to fully solidify. Taking advantage of the clear sky after the rain, Cain walked along the river with Murkrow and Slowpoke, hoping to find the Squirtle he had seen earlier. He guessed there was a small colony of Squirtle in the area. The water level had risen due to the rain, flooding the paths where the Pokémon walked. Now they could only walk through the grass, which was full of water droplets, and it didn't take long for Cain's pants to get soaked. Despite everything, the clear water after the rain often allowed him to see small water-type Pokémon, but Cain felt a bit disappointed as most of what he saw were common Pokémon like Magikarp, with the occasional Goldeen appearing. Eventually, he resigned himself to the situation. After all, Squirtle is a valuable starter Pokémon, it was already surprising to see it in the wild. Capturing one would depend on luck. Cain walked about 10 kilometers along the river without finding a trace of Squirtle, although he did see some relatively rare water-type Pokémon. But since he already had a Slowpoke, he wasn't interested in water types with mediocre abilities, and it wasn't worth spending resources on them. Looks like finding Slowpoke was just a stroke of luck, Cain thought after walking a bit further. He was quite satisfied with having captured such a talented Slowpoke. Searching for Squirtle had been an impulse, and if he didn't find it, it didn't matter. After reaching that conclusion, Cain stopped focusing so much on the water Pokémon. I'll walk a little further and then head back, he thought as the sky began to darken. However, just as Cain was about to walk a bit further, he encountered an unexpected situation that made him immediately retreat. A light blue Pokémon, covered by a flow of water, jumped directly out of the water, landing not far in front of Cain. Golduck! Cain exclaimed, frowning as he saw the Pokémon that had suddenly appeared. This Golduck wasn't one Cain had seen earlier during the storm, and in fact, he hadn't seen a Psyduck during the storm either. Seeing the Golduck that had appeared out of nowhere, Murkrow quickly positioned himself in front of Cain, while Slowpoke approached seriously. His water-type instinct told him that this Golduck was strong, very strong. Cain's eyes flashed as Golduck's data appeared in his mind. Pokémon, Golduck, yellow. Gender, male. Level, 38. Type, water. Ability, damp. Held item, none. Egg moves, Mud Bomb, Yawn. Basic moves, Aqua Jet, Water Sport, Scratch, Tail Whip, Water Gun, Confusion, Fury Swipes, Water Pulse, Disable, Screech, Zen Headbutt, Aqua Tail, Soak, Psych Up. Learned moves, Hydro Pump, Iron Tail, Ice Punch. TMS, none. Cain instantly became serious, his expression turning grim. I didn't expect to run into a level 38 Golduck. What luck! Originally, Cain thought that after the battle between Gyarados and Milotic, no strong Pokémon would appear in this water area, so he felt safe searching for Squirtle. But unexpectedly, a level 38 Golduck appeared. What Cain didn't know was that this Golduck was actually the true owner of this area, while Gyarados and Milotic were just temporary visitors. Due to the immense power of Gyarados and Milotic, Golduck hadn't dared to confront them, so he had hidden along with his colony of Psyduck. It was only after the two Pokémon left following their battle that Golduck emerged from the water's depths. At that moment, he saw Cain and his group wandering through his territory. Filled with fury, Golduck thought, I can't face those two powerful Pokémon, but you little ones dare to provoke me. Fortunately, Cain was unaware of the situation. If he had known, he would have thought, disaster falls from the sky. Looking at the two Pokémon advancing toward him, Golduck eyed them with disdain. As a Pokémon that had reached such a level, he had his own method of judging the strength of other Pokémon. Although Murkrow and Slowpoke showed good eyes and presence, to him, they were still too inexperienced. As the ruler of the region, Golduck generally didn't bother dealing with weak Pokémon like Murkrow and Slowpoke, but his anger needed an outlet, and Cain and his team had just crossed his path. "I'll show you who the real owner is here." Golduck roared internally as a powerful water-type energy began to concentrate in his closed mouth, where the turbulent water began to overflow. He was charging an attack. Cain's heart skipped a beat. Is he really going all out right from the start? He's going to attack us with his full power. He thought quickly. Slowpoke, teleport, let's go. Seeing that Golduck was about to unleash his attack, Cain quickly gave the order. Yadan Slowpoke immediately responded, and with his blue eyes full of psychic power, a blue wave enveloped Cain, Murkrow, and himself. Golduck, sensing Slowpoke's movement, who was also a psychic-type Pokémon, stopped charging the move and fired his Hydro Pump, his strongest water-type move. A column of water the size of a person shot out from Golduck's mouth, quickly approaching Cain. Murkrow, use Protect. With a cold gaze, Cain gave the order just in time. A light green energy shield surrounded Murkrow, and with great effort, he expanded the shield, blocking the Hydro Pump. Slowpoke, quickly. Murkrow could barely maintain the shield as the Hydro Pump, under Golduck's control, continued to fire. Yadan Slowpoke, realizing the situation, ignored the limit of his psychic power and, with a flash of blue light, enveloped Cain and his team in an increasingly powerful wave of energy. In an instant, the psychic wave reached its peak, and with a flash of blue light, Cain, Murkrow, and Slowpoke disappeared from the spot. Bang! The suppressed Hydro Pump exploded in the spot where Cain had been. Golduck watched helplessly as the weak insects vanished before his eyes and felt his majesty as the supreme ruler had taken another hit. But when he thought of Cain's eyes, an inexplicable chill arose from his heart. Golduck couldn't help but shudder and abandoned his intention of pursuing them. With a whistle, he dived back into the water and disappeared. With a fluctuation of psychic energy, the trio reappeared in the cave behind the waterfall. Murkrow stumbled and fell to the ground, exhausted after barely holding on. Slowpoke also collapsed to one side, his spirit drained. Cain's expression was unusually solemn as he said, "There really are many powerful Pokémon in this forest." He helped Murkrow up, gave him a few poke blocks, and then let him rest for a while. "Slowpoke, use Calm Mind to restore your psychic energy," Cain said apologetically after looking at the slow Slowpoke. If Slowpoke hadn't explosively used his psychic energy at the last moment, things wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Yadan Slowpoke let out a faint cry, then closed his eyes and began using Calm Mind. A slight wave of psychic energy appeared around him. This move not only increased the user's special attack and special defense in battle, but it also enhanced the effects of psychic energy during regular training. Chapter 40, Heart of Vengeance. After organizing Murkrow and Slowpoke, Cain sat beside the cave. This time, it truly was an unexpected disaster. He was merely walking near the river when he encountered a powerful ruler of the area. Both Pokémon took a significant hit. However, for Cain, who had explored wild areas in his past life, encountering powerful Pokémon in their territory and being driven off like this was nothing new. "Don't look so down, it's just about living a few more years. As long as we train hard, sooner or later, we'll regain what we lost today," Cain said to console them. With Cain's words, they began to relax as well, transforming their frustration into an inexhaustible source of motivation. "We must become stronger and reclaim what's ours." Although they wanted to start training right away, both Murkrow and Slowpoke were injured to varying degrees, so Cain ordered them to train only after they had fully healed. Thus, in the cave at night, only the sounds of the waterfall and the crackling firewood could be heard, there were no other sounds. Murkrow lay obediently against the cave wall, eyes closed, digesting the poke blocks. Each time it finished absorbing the energy, it would eat another poke block and continue the digestion process. Although poke blocks are automatically absorbed after being consumed, the process can be sped up by mobilizing the body's internal energy, increasing the flow to digest the poke blocks faster. On the other hand, Slowpoke also closed its eyes, lying on the ground. Its mysterious psychic energy enveloped its body, and even the surrounding space showed slight waves of distortion. Cain watched his Pokémon's efforts with keen attention. Since his Pokémon were working so hard and wanted to grow, as their trainer, he could only support them and think about the most suitable training methods and growth directions for them. "If I could make advanced poke blocks, it would definitely accelerate their growth," Cain thought silently. As for how to obtain the tools to make advanced poke blocks, that was something he had to solve. After all, it was his responsibility as a trainer. Murkrow's growth path was very suitable for him, a nimble assassin with low endurance and defense. If he continued daily weight training, his speed would surely reach extraordinary levels. But regarding Slowpoke's growth direction, that was something Cain needed to consider. Slowpoke has two types of evolutions, Slowbro and Slowking. Slowbro specializes in physical defense, while Slowking excels in special defense. Cain hadn't yet decided which type he wanted Slowpoke to evolve into, and besides, this was a decision he needed to discuss with Slowpoke. Though evolving into Slowking is exponentially more challenging than becoming Slowbro, if Slowpoke wanted to become Slowking, Cain would support him with all his strength. In Cain's view, Slowpoke, who is a bit slow but has good endurance and exceptional talent in psychic skills, should aim towards Slowking, focusing on special attack and special defense, without worrying too much about physical defense. However, if Slowpoke wanted to evolve into Slowbro, Cain would also support him. The night in the cave beneath the waterfall was especially cool. Sitting by the fire, Cain became lost in his thoughts, while his two Pokémon were working hard to heal their wounds and return to training as soon as possible. Soon, the night passed. After thinking everything over, Cain instructed Murkrow and Slowpoke to stop and rest. Sometimes, the body's natural recovery ability shouldn't be underestimated. The morning, as always, was dedicated to training, but unlike other days, today Murkrow trained with particular intensity. Yesterday's experience had been a harsh blow for him. Although Slowpoke couldn't train physically, his psychic abilities weren't affected. After overusing teleport yesterday, Slowpoke felt a great increase in his psychic energy and a deeper understanding of that move. Originally, Slowpoke could only lift a single stone with telekinesis for practice, but today, to Cain's surprise, he could lift 2 stones simultaneously. Although the overuse of psychic powers yesterday had been exhausting, the growth achieved was significant. Cain concluded that Slowpoke had always had great psychic potential but had only been using that power superficially. If Slowpoke's psychic energy was compared to a glass of water, his previous use of psychic powers was like drinking through a thin straw. But after yesterday's excessive use, the straw had become twice as wide, exponentially increasing his energy usage. Seeing Slowpoke's growth, Murkrow pushed himself even harder. He knew that in a battle against Slowpoke, part of his success was due to Slowpoke's psychic moves not affecting him, and another part due to Cain's leadership. In terms of overall strength, Slowpoke's combat ability was likely twice as much as his. Of course, as a teammate, Murkrow didn't envy Slowpoke. But that didn't stop him from seeing Slowpoke as a goal. Only through continuous training and improvement could he grow enough. He didn't want to lag behind when Cain captured other powerful Pokémon in the future. As Cain's first captured Pokémon, Murkrow had his pride and didn't want to become a burden to the team. In fact, he wanted to be the strongest Pokémon on the team to protect the others in future battles. While his Pokémon trained, Cain also exercised. Accompanying his Pokémon in their training helped to bring their hearts closer together. When one is busy, time flies. The 3 hours of morning training vanished in the blink of an eye. Although he wanted to continue, Cain didn't forget that he had a mission given by Umbra. Beyond whether completing the mission would allow him to advance in the organization, the 10,000 reward points were something he urgently needed. Now that he had 2 Pokémon to raise, the resource consumption would multiply. The resources needed to raise these 2 Pokémon were astonishing. It didn't seem like raising Murkrow had consumed many resources, partly because Cain made the Poke Blocks himself, so the investment wasn't as high. But for an ordinary trainer, doing something like this would be impossible. You have to know that a single medium-level Poke Block costs 5 points on Team Rocket's exchange list. Murkrow consumes around 30 Poke Blocks a day, meaning a daily investment of 150 points. And if we add the Poke Blocks that Slowpoke needs, the required points increase. Furthermore, we must remember that a Pokémon not only needs physical strength but must also master important moves. Cain had already spent over 10,000 points on teaching Murkrow 3 moves and would need to invest more as both Pokémon learned additional moves. That's why it's so challenging for an average trainer to stand out in this world. Without special opportunities, the resources required to raise a single Pokémon would take a lifetime, and by then, the Pokémon would have passed its peak. Cain had always relied on the system. In his previous life, even with the system's help, he had to become a Pokémon hunter and leverage Team Rocket's resources to reach the level of a quasi-elite trainer. But being a quasi-elite trainer only placed him in the mid-upper ranks among Team Rocket members. In the league, there were countless hidden quasi-elite trainers. Only by becoming an elite level trainer does one barely have the right to live freely in this world. But just barely. After all, being an elite level trainer doesn't mean being one of the elite four. They are two different concepts. He stepped out of the cave, and after yesterday's heavy rain, today the sky was clear. The warm rays of the sun touched Cain's skin as he exited the cave, bringing him a sense of comfort like drinking cool water when thirsty. Walking again on the smooth stones by the lake, Cain noticed that the water, which had risen significantly yesterday, had miraculously returned to its original level. The stones, washed by the rain, shone softly under the sun, showing their cleanliness. Looking at the water's surface, Cain said to Murkrow and Slowpoke, "The next time we come here, it'll be to take revenge." Craw. Yadin. Though Cain's words were calm, the determination in them made Murkrow and Slowpoke feel completely convinced. Both responded with a sound to Cain. This desire for revenge was also what they now believed in, and what would guide their efforts in the future. End of chapter.
Thanks for listening.